Streaming, and we should be good to go. Hey, we're good to go. Awesome. Hopefully all the audio problems should be fixed by now. Lucky you're not privy to the first 10 minutes of setup that goes into figuring out, why am I hearing my voice over and over and over again? Why is the video not playing when I alt to another tab? It's all been solved. I should be in a situation where I can hear... Uh-oh, buffering. That's not good. The one thing I hadn't counted on. The one thing that didn't show up in the test run. Hey, okay, we got some people showing up in chat now. Hello, hello. Welcome, welcome. Arglisman. Ah, Charles V, Your Majesty. Welcome. Don't fail me now. Reconnection successful. All right. Hopefully that didn't just break the scene, the stream. Oh, Will Haynes says, rest in peace, History House Productions. That's sad. That was a bummer. I mean, I'm glad he's off, you know, doing his own thing, doing whatever will make him happy, but it is sad to see that channel go. It was a good one. Oh, good, we're back. Anyway, I was saying that the had to do a really jerry-rigged setup here where I've got the video open and then I have all of my stream set up and everything like that not maximized, but only covering 92% of the screen, so that way it will keep the video rendered for you, because I remember last time that the video, every time I tabbed away, it just showed right through the Chrome window into the one behind it, and it's like, hey, you want to see a quarter of a Google Docs? Someone asked, I've totally missed who was asking, oh, Tactical Noob Tube, what's History House Productions and what happened? Was just a very excellent, very funny comedic history channel who, you know, ran for a few years, and recently he decided to step away from YouTube and stop making videos on that channel. Benjamin Steven asks, how would you know you want to be a pacifist if you haven't tried murder? Well, I feel like pacifism comes in more forms than just murder. Like, you can never murder someone and still very much not be a pacifist. If you want comedic history, go to Tumblr. Tumblr. All right, let's get this thing started, shall we? Robespierre is one of those ones where I just have like the most enormous wall of text sitting here in front of me, so I feel like I'm going to be pausing like every 2 seconds. Or actually, the first like 6 minutes of the video is all just about Louis, so I feel like we're going to go through there and I'm just going to be sitting awkwardly in silence. And then after that, every 2 seconds I'm going to be chiming in, being like, oh, actually, did you know about this and this little spat and these awesome quotes that they were doing in the assembly? But one can be sacrificed for the many. Oh, I still have 3 times speed. We're not going to do this on 3 times speed. Why not 2, or 3, or 10? Little by little, we will find reasons for sacrificing the many for the happiness of the many, and we will think it was a bargain. I say, I hope this is the last of such unpleasant business. I thought it was all rather good. He had some good ideas there at the end. Max, that was a warning, not a suggestion. Max? Sorry, I thought I heard a negative Nancy. It's funny, no matter how many times we take care of her, negative Nancy is always trying to impede the revolution. You don't want to be a negative Nancy, do you? Desmoulins was such a useful character for just for me to like try to make this a little more story-like. I think he and Robespierre actually grew up from a fairly early age, you know, like teenagers or earlier, knowing each other, and so they were very good friends, and that was such a relief to see that and be like, ah, yes, a point of view character who can really spice up the drama. I'm gonna focus everything on him and, you know, make him the framing device. This video is sponsored by Keeps. Alright, we are going to skip through the advertisement. That's the perk you get of going through the live stream as opposed to the main video. Apparently, though, that must have been a pretty popular ad spot, because they came back to me, like, you know, a couple days after the video went live and was like, hey, you want to do more stuff with us? So keep your eyes peeled for that. Is up in the air. The royal coffers ran dry, paying for feasts at Versailles, while the people of France faced food shortages and price hikes that only seemed to get worse every year. Oh, but don't worry, Louis borrowed 1 billion livres in debt so that some British colonists halfway around the world could have their freedom. This was just another one of the things that kind of made Louis very unpopular, was the way that, you know, obviously not just the massive amounts of spending, but kind of the way that he was very, you know, his whole thing was like, oh, I want to be loved by the people. I want to do what's right for the people. And he just ended up flip-flopping on his entire economic policy over the course of, you know, only a few years. Is he would be like, oh, we're gonna fund this huge war with Britain, and that's gonna get us our colonies back, and then we're gonna be on the up and up, and we're gonna be a great power again. And then, like, the next year, he was like, no, actually, we're doing austerity now. We're not going to spend anything on anything, and I will not help you in any way because it involves spending public money. And then a couple of years later, he got a new finance minister, and he says, well, actually, no, we're going to spend lots of money on public infrastructure, and we're going to try to, like, get the economy going that way, and, you know, we're going to borrow more money to do it because we can't raise taxes. So there was just this continued frustration at this king who seemed to have no idea what direction he wanted to go in. At the same time, a young Maximilien Robespierre has just graduated from law school. He's a brilliant and principled gentleman, an eloquent social activist trying to make a change in the world. He attacked the discrimination faced by so-called illegitimate children, he attacked the sidelining of women in academic life, and above all, he attacked the monarchy. Robespierre was in an interesting position in his early life. I gotta find exactly what I wrote about him, but it was basically this weird place where, like, he wasn't formally part of the government because he wasn't really even in the Estates General, you know, until eventually he showed up as, like, a deputy, but, you know, wasn't super influential. And yet, he wrote to all of these people. Like, he just had all of these, you know, important friends that he could write to. And so, without even really publishing anything, without really being part of the government, somehow he is just in this world of the French and general European upper crust, and, like, influencing politics. It was very bizarre. I don't entirely understand how that works. I think, like, the scholarly circles in Europe must have been very small at the time. The fact that the king could sign a letter and send you to jail without a trial, and certainly without collecting $200. The fact that the king could charge your son with a crime and then punish you for it. There was a special name for this, but I've forgotten what it was. Robespierre... There were a handful of things that Robespierre was, like, really keen on in his first few years in public office. And one of them was basically the prerogative of the king to just jail whoever he wanted, you know, no explanation, just be like, hey, you're in jail now. One was something to do with, like, group punishments, which I think was separate from, like, you know, punishing a son for the crimes of his father or stuff like that. I didn't get a whole bunch of details on that. And then the others were, like, voting rights and slavery. So he was very, very outspoken on all those subjects. Hell, Robespierre even gave up his position as a judge out of opposition to the death penalty. Yep, Robespierre opposed the death penalty. Okay. This was literally, like, 1 year out of law school. Like, he graduated law school, I think, in 1782, and then immediately became a judge. Like, I don't know how that works. And then the next year was like, actually, I'm done. This whole law career, I don't know. I don't think it's for me. I'm gonna quit because I don't believe in death penalty. And also, I should point out, this whole image over here, why I'm using that for the death penalty, is because France was still using like pretty medieval methods of execution at the time. Like the death penalty was more than just like a swift execution, which is why the guillotine ended up becoming popular and like a big symbol of the revolution. But you would actually be strapped down to the center, like the spokes of the wheel, or on the outside of the wheel, and it was basically like, yeah, we're gonna kill you, but first we want to mangle your body and put you through as much pain as possible for no clear objective whatsoever. And then we're just gonna like hang up your disfigured corpse somewhere where people can see it. So that was definitely a death penalty that a certain number of people were opposed to. Eventually, he makes a name for himself in local politics and becomes a deputy in the Estates General, France's big special committee that hasn't met in 150 years and is expected to solve all of its tax problems because the king can't figure it out on his own. The problem was, France was a modern society with a feudal government. The estate representing 95% of the population got 1/3 of the votes, and so, this is dumb. You're dumb, we're making our own council where we all get counted equally and we're the ones making the laws. I think I pointed this out in the one on Louis, but the whole thing with the Estates General, trying to represent 95% of the population is somewhat of a myth, because the Third Estate did represent 95% of people, which is everyone who wasn't either a clergyman or a nobleman. But the people who were actually representing, like the people who actually went to the Estates General to represent those 95% of people, were sort of the 1% of the 95%. And bam, just like that, they all got together in an old tennis court at Versailles and decided, guess what? France has a constitution now. Oh, okay, yes. So there was actually a little drama going back and forth before they actually met and decided on the constitution. Louis had kind of a retort to this where he was like trying to insist, like, no, you don't understand. You might be representing 96% of the population accurately, but you've got that missing 4%. I think what we should do is let's just do it the old way and represent 100% of the population, where 5% of the population has 2/3 of the representation. So then he ended up like kicking them out of Versailles and was like, no, we're not doing this. Like, you guys, if you're gonna quit and do your own assembly, you can't just hang around in my palace and make your own government. That's not how this works. Which is then what ended up leading them to, leave the hall, go to this tennis court, and decide, okay, we are not leaving here until we get something decided about a constitution. Or at least it's going to. It takes a while to write that stuff. Now, Robespierre is basically just some kid from another province watching history go down, but it doesn't take long before he gets some recognition, because he's not a philosopher in an ivory tower. He's a protester marching on the ground with the women of Paris to hold the king accountable to the people. This was so the reason Robespierre's got an equality for all men sign is that in the I was about to say, in the early days of his rule, that's not exactly how this works, but obviously as a young man, he was doing all of this stuff. Like, he was complaining about, the misrepresentation of women in academic life, and, he was participating in the Women's March on Versailles, and then once it actually comes down to writing the Constitution, and there's all of this emphasis on, like, we're going to have equality and we're going to give everyone a voice and, like, all of the citizens shall be involved in this government, they end up going with, like, yes, there will be universal male suffrage. And I just kept thinking of that I feel like we're forgetting something. Well, if you've forgotten it, it can't be that important. Meanwhile, all of the women who were involved in the start of the revolution just standing there, displeased. He's also but he did have, I say that, but Robespierre did in many ways have a very progressive sense of, like, who should be able to vote and who should be able to participate in government, because he was arguing to try to remove the clause that said, oh, you have to own land to vote. So in that regard, he was already, well ahead of his American peers, who, I forget when they got rid of that requirement. But anyway, ahead of America at its founding. And also there was all of this stuff about, like, the assembly ended up coming up with what they called passive and active citizens, if I can find what I wrote about them. But effectively, it was supposed to be this, like, meaningful distinction between, there's going to be some citizens who vote and contribute to stuff, and there's going to be some citizens who still have rights, but, like, not all the rights. And in reality, that was just a way to distinguish between the rich voting citizens and the poor citizens who don't get to vote. And Robespierre was pretty profoundly on the side of, like, guys, this is such a dumb system. What are you talking about, having these citizens who just don't own enough stuff to be able to participate in government? So in that regard, even though he did kind of end up casually omitting 50% of the population, he at least got those extra few percentage points where he could. Robespierre should have went to Ireland. Ireland? I am afraid I don't understand the connection to Ireland. Anyone remember which SCP article talks about Robespierre's cult of reason? Actually, Robespierre's cult, we'll get there eventually. It could be like an hour, who knows. But Robespierre's cult was the cult of the divine being, which actually replaced the cult of reason. But both were pretty wacky. Wow, Jack claiming the revolution was misogynistic. Sounds a lot like something a negative Nancy would say. Well, that's why we're glad that we don't live in the revolution today. Part of the Jacobin Club. For the purposes of this video, you can think of them like a political party. And, like, he's new, but Max is killing it. I also forgot there was something about, he ended up, maybe this was just something that I had written, because of, like, the profession of, like, fishwives and or fishmonger women in the March on Versailles or something, but somehow there's, like, fishwives involved in there, and he became, like, the hero of the fishwives. In America, Hamilton defended the Constitution with 51 essays. In France, Robespierre's speeches defending the revolution numbered 328, all while working on that Constitution and arguing that citizens shouldn't need to own property to vote, and that citizens shouldn't be property. Crazy stuff in 1791. There you go. See, here's all the stuff about him giving more rights to some of the people. That go-getter attitude gets Robespierre elected as the Secretary of the National Assembly, which is the thing that replaced the Estates General, except now it's called the National Constituent Assembly, but soon it's going to be the Legislative Assembly. Don't worry about the difference, it's wild in France. The thing that's important is that in the middle of all these debates over how to form militias, the right to bear arms, the death penalty, so these things, which I was originally going to talk about with, like, a little more detail, and then I ended up having to cut them because the script was way too long and it kind of fell outside of the main narrative of the story, there was the National Guard, which was, I believe, the sort of reformed take on French militias, and there was a requirement that to join the Guard, you had to be, I think this was another case of, like, active citizens versus passive citizens, which was, like, only the active citizens get to join the National Guard. We can send the poor people out to fight our enemies abroad, but the ones who are actually going to do any fighting and policing and that sort of thing within France are all going to be active citizens, which was another thing he was involved in, arguing against. There was a lot of like arguments about the right to bear arms, which was, a big talking point just because, kind of similar to the American Revolution, the French Revolution, you have like a government that is taking shape sort of through popular will. And as a result, of this government forming while another government is out there trying to stamp them down, it's like, oh yeah, we should, we want to like pay a lot of attention to how do we argue our case for like, standing our ground against this more oppressive government, yada yada. Robespierre brings up, although that, hopefully I don't forget this, the whole right to bear arms thing comes back in a pretty funny way after Robespierre takes power. It's just sort of another stance that he ends up being supremely hypocritical about. A simple little motion that says, once they're done rebranding, no one from the Constituent Assembly is allowed to be on the Legislative Assembly, and he gets it passed. This seems wild because Robespierre is on the assembly, and so is everybody else that voted on it, but so were all the moderates. The ones dragging their feet on the revolution, the people who thought, okay, good job everybody, we're gonna be a constitutional monarchy just like England and it'll be smooth sailing from here. Frankly, their views weren't all too popular anymore, it's just that they were the biggest names in politics. But if they're banned from running, I guess someone... I was so waiting for just a bunch of angry comments coming out of that one. More revolutionary will have to fill their shoes, won't they? Downside, the Legislative Assembly ends up being a complete failure with 23 presidents in 11 months. So, I should stipulate regarding the Legislative Assembly, I did learn this throughout the video, and it didn't end up changing the script in any way, but when I was first researching, I saw this list of like 23 different presidents in, less than a year, and I was like, oh god, that is some wild political instability. Like, people must just be constantly getting, like, killed or immediately recalled or stuff like that. They actually set it up that way on purpose. They actually made it so that you would be president of the assembly for like 2 weeks, and I guess like the president must have been a very small role, like there couldn't have been too much power in it, but I find that just insane because I don't know what their plan was to get anything done when leadership is changing every 2 weeks. Upside, no more royal apologists in the assembly, because it turns out the King of France is attempting to use a foreign army to crush the French people into submission. Monarchy is a bad look right now, and so the whole thing about using a foreign army to crush the French people has to do with the king trying to escape to Austria, because the whole deal was that, like, he thought that, hey, maybe if we get out of the country, if we go to Austria, where he obviously is connected to, has some familial ties through his wife, Marie Antoinette, who is originally Maria Antonia, that, maybe they can get the Austrians to help them out and help restore order, quote-unquote, to France. And even the moderate royalists like Lafayette apparently can't be trusted not to massacre the French people. Again, another thing that is just referencing the previous video, Lafayette had the National Guard just became increasingly unpopular because they still served the king, and there was a real tense standoff where people were like throwing rocks at the National Guard, and eventually, like, someone in the National Guard panicked and opened fire on a bunch of civilians, and it ended up being effectively France's version of the Boston Massacre. Downside, Robespierre doesn't want to go to war with Austria, but tough luck, he's not on the assembly anymore. This, I have something about here. Oh, right, this. So the reason that Robespierre didn't want to go to war with Austria is really funny. He was super worried about, like, Caesarism. He's like, no, guys, you don't understand. If we get involved in a big war with the rest of the continent, like, someone is going to rise up and end up taking a bunch of power, and controlling all of France, you know, in the same way that Caesar did in Rome. We're the kings, like, we might not have a king, but we're going to have a general who becomes a dictator. And it's like, wow, Robespierre, you really do have a lot of foresight. It's a shame that you ended up becoming the dictator yourself. And Brissot, the new guy in charge, he does want war. The war goes to hell in a handbasket. The French army is not only undertrained, France is teetering on civil war. Most of the commanding officers are noblemen, so either they fled the country, or no one under their command trusts them, much less trusts them with their lives. That's why within 10 days of declaring war, the French went to battle, saw the enemy, immediately ran away, and killed their own general on... I'm very happy with how this... Oh, I think I interrupted it in the middle of the punchline. But just to say, I'm very happy with how this scene turned out. The way out, because he might have been part of a conspiracy. You never know. I wish I had more stuff. I can try to find... I pulled this up just to, like, jog my memory, just in case. But I doubt I'm going to find it unless there's, like, a whole section about war with Austria? ? Can we do it? Anyway... The whole thing was that, like, the general was, like, trying to get them to keep going, I think. He's like, no, guys, keep fighting. We can't run away yet. And they're like, he wants to sacrifice us to the Austrians. He wants to kill us all. He must be destroyed. And as they're running away, they just shoot the general. If I command F battle, can I oh, what? Impossible. Only one reference to the word battle? Impossible. I really wish... If anyone knows what that's called, if we have This Is Barris in the audience again. Culture Free Media, Robespierre was obsessed with Rome. Interesting. A lot of people end up being obsessed with Rome. I can kind of see why. But it is funny that, like, there's so many instances, like, you know, obviously you've got, like Machiavelli was a huge Rome fanboy. There's all of these, you know, important political people who are like, ooh, but can I imitate Rome? Everything comes to a head in 1792. Robespierre has just foiled another attempt by Louis to flee the country, and to be honest, everyone's kind of done with the king trying to sell them out to their traditional sworn enemies. Well, one day, the king's head of security is assassinated, and wouldn't you know it, the next morning there's an assault on the palace being led by Robespierre's friends, Danton and Desmoulins. This is the uprising of something in August, like the 10th of August, 1792. It was a date that I saw many, many times. I'm shocked it wasn't just permanently engraved into my memory. But it's the attack on the Tuileries Palace in France while the royal family is hiding in there, and there's all this kind of... God, I feel bad being like, hey, this is very interesting because interesting things happened. But that's effectively all I've got. But I just remember there are more details in there beyond, oh, people attack the palace. There's like a whole timeline of, you know, 6 p.m. the last night, the guy is assassinated. 7 in the morning, people arrive here, here, and here. 7:30, you know, the doors are breached. 7:45, the king hears about it, and blah, blah, blah. There's a very intricate series of events that ends up playing out around this. This might be it. Our last stand. Is there nothing we can do to win? Dear, when the enemy is at the gates, even when their voices roar like thunder, even when they number more than the hairs on your head, you must remember, there is always something you can do. Book it! Go, go, go! In an act of humility, Louis runs, still amuses me, to the Legislative Assembly for protection, only to find... What are you doing? Get down! What are you doing? I thought I was the one under attack. Well... You know how we decided not to prosecute Lafayette for his little whoopsie on the Champ de Mars? Yeah, turns out we're not revolutionary enough for the revolution. The king and his strange bedfellows in the assembly watched on to see what would happen to the Swiss guard defending the palace, and oh boy, it was not pretty. it was not pretty for a number of reasons. It was, A, not pretty because I think just a bunch of them ended up being killed. Like, they were outnumbered, potentially outgunned, and really sort of cornered. So the king escaped, and they're just left guarding this palace, and not really protecting anything except, just fighting for their lives. And then the other reason it ended up turning ugly was that this was sort of I have it somewhere, but I want to say this was like one of the first times where they brought out the guillotine. Yes, it was some of the early uses of the guillotine. They're like, hey, we've got this great new invention. We can kill them without breaking every bone in their body slowly over the course of days. Let's try that. So, compared to that, the guillotine's not as bad. This also ties into the September massacres, which were the event that, Talleyrand narrowly avoided while he was in London. And those were effectively, after the Swiss Guard were locked up, right, France was losing the war really badly. There was this general atmosphere of fear that Austria any day now is going to come marching on Paris. And so people were afraid that you have all of these royalist Swiss guards just sitting in the prison, and that as soon as Paris becomes a battleground, all of these Swiss guards are just gonna rise up, break out of prison, and join the enemy and tear down Paris from the inside. And so there was just this mass hysteria that led to all the prisoners in Paris getting killed extrajudicially. There was also at this time that Danton was making, big speeches about hey, anyone who isn't actively participating in Paris's defense shall be killed, i.e., Swiss Guard, we're coming for you. Oh, yeah, there was also, at the same time, so while those September massacres were going on, I really hope that, after this, there isn't, immediately a sentence in the video talking about the September massacres, but I don't think there is. As those were going on, Robespierre ran to go check on the safety, or I should say on the security of the royal family, which could be read in one of two ways. Either he was, going to make sure, let's make sure the royal family isn't being killed while there's all of these mass murders going on in the prison, or it could be, hey, let's make sure the royal family isn't taking advantage of this situation to escape. But that's just another, if I were given the privilege to write an actual series about this or something, that would just be such a fun moment, because I think that's really the only time that Robespierre would have gotten to directly speak to the royal family. Eventually, the insurrectionists turned their attention to the assembly, and the assembly went, "We got him! Louis, you've been a bad, bad boy, and you are officially dethroned!" Yeah. Just like that, France is a full-on republic, and the new face of the government is the Paris Commune, a hitherto unmentioned office led by Danton and Desmoulins. So, this is another thing that I didn't quite get to fit in here, Brissot, so wherever he is, Brissot, this guy in the corner, he was the face of the Jacobins at the time, and sort of quickly fell out of favor. And actually, Robespierre, he wasn't the one that introduced the motion, but he was definitely involved in it. There was this motion that said, hey, royalist deputies, which I'm not sure 100% what that means. If Brissot, was formerly an advisor of some kind to the king, or, employed by the royal family. But anyway, there's just another motion that says, hey, such and such people cannot be elected. Legally, you cannot vote for them. They are not allowed to hold office, which is a pretty, you know, unsettling thing as soon as you mention that. Like, it's one thing when it's kind of applied to yourself, when you do that sneaky little, ho-ho, we're gonna, like, make ourselves ineligible so that these other people are ineligible, and it's under the guise of making it seem like we're creating this constitution that won't benefit ourselves. But as soon as you start, you know, singling people out and saying, hey, you can't be voted for, people get worried. And so these accusations start coming out against Robespierre, saying, like, you know, Robespierre, you are turning into a tyrant. You know, people are talking about, oh my God, Robespierre is going to become a dictator or form a triumvirate with Danton and this other guy, Marat. And that's crazy. A triumvirate? No one's had a triumvirate in 2,000 years. Why would a Frenchman circa 1800 possibly want to have a triumvirate? That would be such a silly thing. Anyway, they lob these accusations at Robespierre, and he just has this, like, really sick line. Let me pull it up. Saying, I'm a dictator by what means? I'm one of many people acting on a similar compulsion. That is your dictatorship of opinion. And he also said, if you, this is all paraphrase, but he basically laid out this argument that's like, I am just doing what my heart tells me is right, and lots of people just happen to agree with me. And if you want to try to accuse me of doing anything illegal, you could just come after the entire government. Why don't you attack everyone in the government? I mean, after all, taking down the monarchy was illegal. Storming the Bastille was illegal. The revolution is illegal. How, like, do you want... I wish I had the exact quote, but it came down to, like, citizens, do you want a revolution without a revolution? But, of course, you know, people still comparing him to cult leaders and all that when we get to Condorcet. Parisians attacked prison. Oh, man, chat is going fast. I can't even keep up with this. You've been a very bad boy. Yeah. All right, let's go. Maybe, if it'll play. Just like that, France is a full-on republic, and the new face of the government is the Paris Commune, a hitherto unmentioned office led by Danton and Desmoulins. Desmoulins is patting himself on the back thinking, okay, good job everybody, we're a republic now, and it'll be smooth sailing from here. But that is moderate talk. Oh man, I also... where it should be here in my notes, but it is not. There's kind of a whole thing about the way that Desmoulins viewed the revolution, and he kind of viewed the storming of the royal palace as like, this is the culmination of the revolution. Like, the revolution is finally over, he says, about like 10 years before the revolution actually ends. The question remained, what to do with Louis? Brissot, who managed to make it out of the insurrection with some sort of a political career intact, argued that if Louis died, there goes all of France's leverage against Austria. And then, an orgy of evidence came pouring out of Louis's closet, revealing that a bunch of moderate revolutionaries were in Louis's pocket trying to keep him in power the entire time. The big one for this was the French politician Mirabeau, who was, you know, kind of acting as like the good guy go-between, sort of the middle ground position between the royalists and the revolutionaries, who I think was like arguing for a constitutional monarchy or something. And then he died, and everyone really respected him, and everyone thought he was a great guy. And then at some point there was like, not a literal skeleton in the closet, but just actually like a bunch of letters found in a closet that was, you know, Mirabeau writing to the king and being like, don't worry, my guy, I'm going to get you back in power. Which, of course, led to the general paranoia about everyone and being like, if you are not the perfect revolutionary, then you must be against us. So Robespierre has seriously got to grapple with his whole no death penalty thing. And at the end of the day, he argues thus. To leave Louis alive in prison would be to invite to his troubled nation war and treason, and to exile him would be more dangerous still. With regret, Robespierre declares a fatal truth. Louis must die so that the nation may live. This was ripped from a Robespierre quote that goes, yes, the death penalty is, in general, crime, unjustifiable by the indestructible principles of nature, except in cases of protecting the safety of individuals or the society altogether. A king whose name attracts the scourge of war upon a troubled nation, neither prison nor exile can render his existence inconsequential to public happiness. With regret, I pronounce this fatal truth. Louis must die so that the nation may live. Order! Order! All right, how many votes for guilty? Yep. All in favor of immediate execution? 1, 2, 3, 4. All opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4. By a count of 360 to 360, it seems we have a tie. Sorry, King's cousin here, how you doing? I say we kill him, no questions asked. Well, the king's dead, so I guess we don't have to worry about people conspiring to put him in power. Should be smooth sailing from here. I've pointed this out previously, but the whole thing about the tie and the votes was that originally it was like a vote between 3 options, and kill him immediately was like exactly 50%, and then the others were split between the two. So they ended up having a recount where, you know, the only 2 options were, okay, are we acquitting him and saying, okay, he can go free, or are we killing him now? And in that vote, you know, basically everybody I think everybody voted to kill him except a few people who just abstained, but I don't think there were any votes for like, let's let him go. Conspiring to put him in power. Should be smooth sailing from here. It wasn't. This may come as a shock, but in the process of restructuring France's entire government from the ground up, a lot of people had different ideas about how things should be run, and some people were more revolutionary than others. Now, the moderates were the Girondins, a faction within the Jacobins who basically wanted the same things as everybody else, but were like 20% less extreme about how to get it. But after everything so-called moderates did to betray the revolution before, Robespierre sees only 2 parties, the people and the enemies of the people. Robespierre begins to call for their arrest, and it turns out that when you threaten your political rivals with arrest and execution, they don't respond kindly. The president of the National National Convention, he tells Robespierre, this was a very funny thing that I have, while researching this, right, there's like 20 different named politicians who are all important in some way. There's like 10 different names for the government. And so I kind of poke fun at that with the like, oh, it was the Legislative Assembly, now the Constitutional Assembly, now the blah, 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 commune. In my notes that I actually wrote, you know, before making the video was, blah, 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 National Convention. Robespierre has Marat and the commune on his side. In brackets, oh Jesus, who are they? You might have all of Paris wrapped around your finger, but the rest of France is tired. And if you continue to threaten the government, there's more than enough men in France to rise up against Paris. And Robespierre goes, you may be right. But so, talking about France rising up against Paris, that is also based on something that this dude here, whose name I can't remember, said. And then, you know, this is like, they actually did close, like, as he was saying this, they closed all of the city gates so that the Girondins couldn't leave. They're like, hey, so if you're gonna say that Paris is going to war with the rest of France, you really chose a bad time to do that. And there's this very dramatic moment where, like, they actually, Robespierre and the people on his side kind of force the president to stand down, because they're like, hey, either you can do what we say right now and step down, or if you, like, don't yield to us right now, this very moment in this room with all of the most powerful men of France inside of it, we are going to ignite a civil war.
It would be a shame if the people of Paris got to you first.
This time, the government is hiding in the palace, and so the palace is stormed once more. The Girondins... And this, I actually do have written down. This is the May 31st insurrection. Girondins are captured and taken as hostages, if not killed on the spot. Brissot, once charged with leading France, is charged now with treason and taken to the guillotine. Opposition to Robespierre and his faction is no more. With France under siege by enemies foreign and domestic, Paris must be of one mind. The reign of terror had begun. Now, the reign of terror sounds very spooky. It sounds like terror in general is not a word that most people would want associated with their government. Not Robespierre. Robespierre actually has been stated as saying, quote, if the main spring of popular government in peacetime is virtue, amid revolution it is at the same time virtue and terror. Virtue without terror is fatal. Terror without... I'm reading this all wrong. It is both virtue and terror. Virtue without which terror is fatal. Terror without which virtue is impotent. Terror is nothing but prompt, severe, inflexible justice. It is therefore an emanation of virtue. The dude is basically Light Yagami. But Brissot was right about the rest of the country not being so keen on Robespierre and, terrorism. Oh, also at this point, the reason Marat never comes up in this video is because he was assassinated by a Girondin sympathizer around this point. So he, you can tell the story without him. Frenchmen across the country rise up in revolt, and Robespierre asks himself, have I become the enemy of the people? No. The people are the enemy of the people! Come October, the Constitution is suspended, and the new supreme government is Robespierre's deliciously ironic Committee of Public Safety. The Committee of Public Safety was actually, Robespierre is the one, most associated with it, because I think he was in control of it for the longest time, and obviously killed lots of people with it. It was actually started by Inaud, who I think was that guy talking about, hey, France is going to rise up against Paris. But for a while, before Robespierre came into it, it was actually Danton who was known for being in charge of the Committee of Public Safety. It was just that under Robespierre, it became a lot more centralized and took on a lot more power. The French army is sent to suppress the counter-revolutions, while in Paris, Robespierre purges the city. The king's cousin is charged with the crimes of his son, guillotined. The philosopher Condorcet was a traitor who criticized the Constitution, even though the government suspended it anyway, guillotined. So, while we're here talking about random hypocrisies that old Max did, Condorcet was the one who was actually first comparing Robespierre to a cult, which I find very interesting because it's just kind of cool to see what people's perceptions of cults and cult leaders were at that time, because I feel like that's a thing that, now it's everyone's favorite kind of armchair psychology topic, but obviously this predates psychology, and I feel like, unless there were medieval or early modern Jonestowns, I'm not really sure what comparisons he was drawing to. Although I guess, you could say there were things like the Anabaptist uprising in Munster that were pretty culty. Anyway, the other thing, I mentioned we would get to the irony with his arguments about the right to bear arms, and that is because there was a woman who was arrested near Robespierre's property. I think near his home. Let me make sure about this. If I can remember the phrasing that I used. Oh, come on, where is it? No. There it goes. Okay, so yes, there was a woman who was approaching his home, and she had with her 2 penknives and a change of clothing. And the irony, of course, is that she hadn't actually done anything. Robespierre just, like, arrested her for being near him with weapons. So, like, yes, the French people must at all times be armed and be ready to fight against oppression. Except when they're near me. When they're near me, they are not allowed to be armed. And there's also a funny little anecdote that, like, the change of clothing is kind of weird, and that was because when they asked her about it, she was like, yeah, no, the change of clothes is just so that I can make myself more presentable in the event that I am captured and inevitably executed. Ooh, I'm just looking at what we've got coming up here. Play? Every time I pause it, it gets more reluctant to continue. Oh boy.
Danton, who stirred the people of Paris to storm the king's palace and slaughter the royalists in prison, too soft, a counter-revolutionary, guillotined.
Danton, this plays into, like, a moment in the way that I portrayed Desmoulins's fall from grace, you know, his capture and execution and, you know, turning against Robespierre, yada yada, is that at the end of this next scene, you know, Robespierre angrily shouts, anyone who is worried is guilty. And that also is derived from a real Robespierre quote, because it was actually at Danton's trial that Robespierre wanted Danton to be executed, and everyone was, like, not super happy about that. And all of a sudden, Robespierre just gets really quiet, and he says, whoever trembles at this moment is guilty. And no one wanted to be caught, you know, arguing in defense of Danton at the risk of making themselves seem guilty to Robespierre. And it was actually Danton's execution that had just this, like, profound personal impact on Robespierre and the way that the rest of the government looked at Robespierre.
Desmoulins is a child, a spoiled brat whom others have led astray, but he needn't die.
Again, also taken from his actual arguments in favor of trying to save Desmoulins' life. Desmoulins at that time was sort of like trying to secretly publish a bunch of letters condemning the government, being like, hey, revolution has officially gone too far. And he eventually got caught out on it. And so Robespierre was, like, trying to step in and be like, no. He is too incompetent to be guilty, you see. And it didn't totally work. There was a bunch of stuff with Robespierre and Desmoulins. They had a pretty interesting relationship. If I can remember where everything was. Because there was one point where, like, Desmoulins actually said something to Robespierre and was like, hey, I think that this, like, could be bad. I think things might be going in a bad direction. And why can't I find it? Oh, I did have the terrors. Speaking to myself. Anyway, there was some point where, like, Desmoulins said, hey, we're going too far, and Robespierre, like, actually listened to him. Robespierre, you know, tried to tone it back a little bit, but he actually, when he did, he kind of met resistance from the rest of the government, and so he was kind of like, well, you know, I guess that's just not what the people want. The people want blood, so I must deliver it to them. Where? I'm just looking at a wall of text, trying to Control F and hope that I find things. sad. Anyway, I suppose I will just continue. But yeah, there was as much drama as there was with Danton. There was also that drama with Desmoulins, who, you know, kept trying to reel back in Robespierre and try to like save him from going off the deep end. Actually, I don't want to full screen that. And Robespierre just, you know, was too far gone. What? What?
He'll burn his journals and show the people our answer to his outrageous criticisms, won't you, Desmoulins? Burning my criticisms is not answering them.
This is a sicker burn than it sounds, because the person that he is referencing here when he said this is Rousseau, who is this like Enlightenment philosopher who both Desmoulins and Robespierre like both really looked up to. So there's just something really poetic about like in this really heated moment of the two of them trying to argue who's right, of Desmoulins like pulling this card and being like, oh, remember that philosopher you idolized? He seems to agree with me a lot in this situation because he wrote this exact quote that is just so perfect for what you are literally asking me to do right now.
What'll it be, Max? You were my friend, Desmoulins, but I must always choose the people.
Which people? You'll guillotine every last man in France until there's no one standing but you and a very nervous executioner. This is not an actual quote, but it is inspired by... Oh, okay. Oh, here it is. Look at me, actually finding things in a timely manner. There's this cartoon that, like, inspired that line and made me do the like unlimited blade works of guillotines thumbnail for this video, which is like, I think this is Robespierre. You just have guillotines everywhere. Everyone in France is dead, and Robespierre is guillotining the executioner. And I just thought that was like such a nice visual image that I really wanted to reference somewhere in this video. Should I be worried?
Only if you're guilty! Anyone who's worried is guilty!
Robespierre decapitated so many people, he had to upgrade the... I found that thing that I was talking about with Desmoulins earlier. It was basically... It was while he was in charge of the Committee of Public Safety. Desmoulins was, like, trying to, like, make him more moderate. And Robespierre goes, you know what? Okay, we're going to do an investigation to see if there were any wrongful arrests or wrongful executions of people who turned out to not actually be enemies of the people, enemies of the Republic. But he proposed that, and then it got shut down, and he basically didn't really do anything after that. He was kind of like, yeah, all right, well, you know, c'est la vie.
The courtroom so he could sentence 60 people at the same time. Even former presidents of the Republic were getting axed. No one was revolutionary enough for Robespierre. And in the middle of it all, he ended slavery. Wild how one really good thing ended up in the middle there. Seems like the writers did a lazy job of trying to make him redeemable, but
which will, this whole point will come back a little bit in the Napoleon video.
Never really went anywhere. And then he started a cult and parading around.
Okay, so before we get to the cult, which is a big thing in its own right, I found some more stuff about Danton and Desmoulins. Desmoulins had some nice... Desmoulins and Danton were, like, executed at the same time, and Desmoulins had a very sad bunch of last words. He said something along the lines of, I have dreamed of a republic such as all the world would have adored. I could never have believed that men could be so ferocious and so unjust. Meanwhile, you know, Robespierre has this very, like, Judge Dredd attitude, and there's a very good... Some other historian... Ooh, someone says Marat was the 18th century version of a vitriolic internet extremist. So there you go. There's your introduction to Marat. I don't know enough about him to comment how accurate that is, but suit yourself. So anyway, there's this very Judge Dredd attitude of Robespierre, which was very well encapsulated by this historian that said, quote, "All politics, according to Robespierre, must tend to establish the reign of virtue and confound vice. He reasoned thus: those who are virtuous are right. Error is a corruption of the heart. Error cannot be sincere. Error is always deliberate," which I feel like is such the perfect encapsulation of the way that Robespierre treated people, which was just this like, yeah, if you're not the perfect revolutionary, you must be doing that on purpose. It is literally impossible to make mistakes. Mistakes are just sin turned into another form. Oh, I forgot about this. So at I forget if it was Danton or Desmoulins, but it's probably Desmoulins. Someone suggests to Robespierre that, hey, maybe we should give Robespierre, or maybe we should give Desmoulins the opportunity to defend himself in court. Like, I think that Desmoulins has as much right as any other citizen to defend himself in court. And Robespierre goes, you know what? You're right. He does have as much right to a fair trial as everyone else. We didn't give anyone else a fair trial. Therefore, it would be unfair to give Desmoulins a fair trial. And so they just straight up convicted him without trial. Gee, we got a donation from Rome too. Thanks so much. Saying, hey Jack, what is your favorite time period in history? Like, is it basic to say that I really love the, like, first 100 years of the Roman Empire? You know, the stuff from like, I say even going from, like, Marius and Sulla to, like, you know, the 5 good emperors. I really love that time period. I think it's a time period that I have spent the most time researching. So it's the time period that I'm most familiar with and that I sort of grew up knowing fun facts about and things like that. But the French Revolution, oh my goodness, this was like such a joy to research. I mean, it was dense. It felt like coming into that whole Roman shindig without any background knowledge and being like, oh God, who are these people? What's going on? Why are there so many important people? And why does the government keep changing? But coming out of it at the other end was super rewarding to be like, wow, a lot happened in a very short amount of time. And it just makes it all, like, you know, very, very intricate and like a very well plotted movie. Basic. It's very basic. It's very basic. The French Revolution needs an HBO show. Does the French Revolution not have an HBO show? That seems impossible to me. Like, I know it's gotten a decent number of you know, adaptations in other places. And actually, I forget what it was from because I didn't watch the whole movie, but I just found this scene on YouTube. There's a scene on YouTube of Robespierre's, like, not his final moments, but of the convention turning against him. And it is so good. It's so much fun to watch. I don't know if it's just because, like, I have this image of the thing in my mind, and so, like, actually seeing it on screen gives me chills, but there's just, you see this, like, shift from this being a civil government meeting to it just being an absolute, like, mania. Like, Robespierre is getting, like, attacked and he's, like, chasing himself out. It's because they're all, like, it's after Robespierre makes the announcement of, like, hey, there's a bunch of traitors in the government, but I won't tell you who they are. And you just see this shift over a couple minutes of all of the other people in the government being like, give us the names, god damn it. And then when they realize he won't do it, you know, he's still trying to, like, wax poetic about justice, and they're like, dude, you didn't give us the names, buddy. You done goofed. It's over. And they chase him out, and he's, like, running through the streets, and he's just, like, hoping that he can get somewhere and, like, start a defense before the rest of Paris realizes what's happened. So good. So good. Jamison Orton knows what I'm talking about. The actor playing Robespierre was Polish. Wow. Speaking of Fouché, the guy who had the idea to betray everybody. See, I'm not even familiar with that guy. This is what I love about the French Revolution. Is like there's stories upon stories that are just like nested in each other and like intersecting with each other and interacting with each other in the most unusual way. Where like I can tell you the story of the French Revolution, and then I can tell you the same also about the French Revolution from another person's perspective, and the two will be just like totally different stories. Professor Gandour, I don't know the video name. If you search for like, Robespierre, someone says Robespierre speech or like Robespierre, in the assembly or something like that. I'm sure you can find it. I should probably get going on the video, huh?
Sound like a Roman emperor, and I don't even have time to get into all of that nonsense because my first draft of this episode was like half an hour long, but like, look at this.
So, this picture, which is pretty crazy, I forget what they made this mountain out of. Let me go open up the page on the Cult of the Supreme Being. So, Robespierre was not Christian, because Christianity really fell out of favor very fast during the French Revolution. To the point where they were like trying to abolish all religion. And at first, like before this, right, you have the Cult of Reason, which was this. It was like someone had this idea that was like, hey, so religion is kind of important to a lot of people, and it kind of serves a function in society, and abolishing it on short notice is kind of going to be problematic and like challenging for us. What if we made a religion about not having religion? What if we made a secular religion where just we worship reason and we worship logic and we praise facts and logic? So that was the original take. And then Robespierre's thing came around where he's like, so I'm not saying this is Christianity, like don't take the wrong idea here, but maybe like instead of an atheistic religion, he's like, nah, let's have like some kind of a god, so that we can have something to worship besides the idea of reason. And there's stuff here about, what, oh god, virtue. Oh, Robespierre and his virtue. I think there's like an oversimplified quote that people were putting in the comments of the main video where Robespierre was like, yes, bow down to my virtue. It was one of those things he just liked to, wax poetic on. So there was this big festival, and what did they make the mountain out of? Man-made mountain, that's all it says. For some reason, I want to say it was like mache, which paper mache would not have worked, but it's some kind of construction. So they've got this like, this big, huge mountain that they put near Paris, and like Robespierre before had that defense, right? Where he could say, I am not a dictator. I am no one special. I am just a government employee who happens to do what he thinks is right, and a lot of people happen to agree with me. And then he does this, where he is just like, he's dressed like a dandy, he's walking in front of the rest of government, he's ascending this mountain with like a big statue of somebody or other. It doesn't say anything about what the statue is. It's probably because there's a whole different page for the festival, maybe. There's this big statue, there's a big mountain, it's super dramatic, it's super extra. And he rises to the top and he gives a speech, and that same historical drama that I was talking about earlier that I don't know the name of also has a rendition of this. And the rest of the government is like, okay, so does anyone else find it odd that we are all marching a good distance behind our great and glorious leader, who is now also trying to lead the state religion? There's a guy here who's in charge of the Republic of France and also in charge of our new French religion. I'm a little put off by this. And then, that helped contribute to his downfall, and then everybody kind of forgot about it, and then Napoleon was like, hey, let's not do this anymore. This is a dumb idea. Oh, Jameson Orton says it is paper mache and cardboard. Wow, that is impressive that they actually managed to build, like, a mountain out of that, like, you can actually put a crowd of people on. That is insane. Also Scientology, but in the French. The cult of Ben Shapiro. I mean, basically, that's what the cult of reason was. That's true. So, a fellow named Dammit Albert says, I genuinely believe some of Robespierre's legacy was at least demonized by his enemies. And that is true, right? Like, after Robespierre died, the government didn't actually change after he died. Like, it was basically all the same people. And so, when they decided to call off the Reign of Terror after executing Robespierre, they didn't want to call attention to the fact that, like, the people who did the Reign of Terror were still ruling. So they put it all on Robespierre. They put as much as they could onto him, and they said that Robespierre was a terrible man who did terrible things, and it was all his fault, and we had nothing to do with it. Please do not be alarmed that we are going to continue to rule you. So that is where, a lot of the image of him comes from. What if Napoleon kept it going? You think he could work it? I think part of Napoleon's, Napoleon was a very practical person. I think, what made Napoleon work was that he ruled his empire in a way that was very pragmatic, and he was like, it's strange because it wasn't like he was like, yes, I'm going to do this the most pragmatic way possible, even if that means doing horrible things to people, even though, he did have issues, like bringing back slavery and also, not having so much free speech, yada yada, but he wasn't like a Stalin or somebody, but he was very like, okay, I have these are my ideals. These are the things that I really want to work towards. These are the things that I want France to be. These are the things that I want to share with the rest of Europe. But here are the virtues that I am less keen on. Here are the things that we can sacrifice. Napoleon knew what he was willing to sacrifice, and he really had, his list of priorities all set up. Anyway, France finally gets a big win over the Austrians, and for the first time, Paris isn't under threat of an imminent invasion, so the rest of the government asks Robespierre if maybe it's time to dial back the military crackdowns. And Robespierre tells them, "What did I tell you about being worried?" And yeah, saying you were worried was a literal crime now, because you were seeking to inspire discouragement, and all your neighbors, if they heard you, were legally obligated to turn you in. And you might think, wow, that's insane. How did they process so many cases? And I'll tell you how. They got rid of witnesses, they got rid of lawyers, they stuck 60 people in a courtroom, and if you were polite, you might be allowed to give your own defense for like 15 minutes, and then they either let you go free, or they decided you were a negative Nancy, and they f***ing murdered you. Robespierre's tribunal system abolished literally every penalty other than the death penalty. Upgrades, people, upgrades! New, bigger courtrooms. They were also like, they had to start digging mass graves to fit all of the people that they were killing. There's just a whole lot of excitement going on. So the government is like, oh god, this guy's insane! And Robespierre crashes in through the door shouting, "Insane, am I? Is that what you've been thinking?" Oh right, they also had to, I think the cemeteries became overcrowded, so they had to like just start, that's where the mass graves came in, building outside the city, had to start expanding their capacity to hold dead people because there was just too darn many dead people in Paris. King,
You know what this sounds like? London propaganda. There's conspiracists all throughout the government, and I know who you are, and I'm coming to get you. And like, maybe he only had a couple people in mind, but he wouldn't show them a complete list of names, and everyone in that room is thinking the same thing about him. So,
another little factor that made this whole situation right before Robespierre's downfall just that extra little bit more interesting was that he was also, at the same time, he was up for re-election. So he was trying to, like, be as popular as possible, and it's just the way he went about that was like, great, I will just intimidate everyone into voting for me.
So he's just threatened to execute the entire government. So when Robespierre comes back the next day, everybody attacks him and says, "Traitor! You didn't run your speech through the committees before coming here. That's against the rules. You must be conspiring against the government." And Robespierre wants to be like, "Have you lost your mind?" But you're not allowed to talk in your defense if you're disrespectful.
So, yes, that was an actual rule that they passed, because, you know, if you say bad things about the government, you are not allowed to have any kind of defense in your trial. You are just assumed to be guilty. There's also, so Robespierre, like, bouncing around between the different sides of the room here, there was, like, there's a moment where he's actually, like, kind of running around the room, like, looking for allies, being like, "You gonna help me out? How about you? You?" And each time he tries to, like, sit down at some part of the room, you know, everyone kind of, like, gets up and shoos him away, and they're like, "Ha! No rest for you." This is also where there's a very good quote where Danton suddenly becomes relevant again. Is that someone, like, shouts, he chokes on the blood of Danton, and it's this, like, chilling blow to Robespierre. But then he turns around and he just roasts them, because he calls out everybody in the room and is like, oh yeah, Danton, poor Danton. Yeah, I killed Danton. Look at me being the bad guy. Oh, that's right. Every single one of you voted to kill Danton. You know, you were all there when Danton got executed. Why didn't any one of you speak up against him? Oh, that's right, because you are all cowards. And then I think he just, like, tied that back into, like, and that's why you're coming to kill me. You're all afraid. It was spicy.
The only guys who step up to help him are his brother Augustin and a man named Lebas, who come up and say, "Oh yeah? If you want to kill Max, you'll have to kill us too. All in favor?"
Aye! Also involved with Robespierre's party and, like, another one of his close associates was this man named Saint-Just, or Saint-Just, which is such a fabulous name. And he was, I think, directly involved in some of the more extreme aspects of Robespierre's government and was, like, another guy that kind of took the fall.
So they're all sent to prison, but they break out, but the army hunts them down and is busting down the doors. Lebas kills himself with a pistol and hands it to Robespierre. Augustin just jumps out the window and impales himself on a bunch of bayonets like a maniac. And Robespierre tried to kill himself, maybe, but they stopped him, so he shot himself in the jaw instead. He's sent to await execution in the same bed as Danton, just for poetic justice. But he didn't have to wait long, because the Committee of Public Safety was very efficient. Max shuts his eyes tight as he's brought to the scaffold and sealed inside his own instrument of death. It's possible he had some last words.
I think he actually is recorded as, like, having his eyes shut during the whole procession going up to the scaffold. And whether that's him, like, being afraid of having his head cut off, or just him trying to, like, spare himself the indignity because, you know, everyone, like, somehow, like all guillotine executions, a guy falls out of favor with the government, you know, with the assembly, and then of course everyone in the public immediately has their attitudes about him change, and they're all booing and jeering at him on the scaffold, you know, not without reason. But I do find it funny the way that, like, a lot of historical accounts seem to write about the public perception of someone changing at almost the exact moment that the perception of them changes among a handful of people at the highest level of power.
planned, but to clear his neck, the executioner had to remove the bandage holding his jaw together, and he screamed. An agonizing, blood-curdling scream louder than a tiger. France's most eloquent locutor screamed and screamed and screamed until his lungs went empty forevermore.
Hey, the little end cards actually show up. I found that if you play, let me pause. I found that if you play the video like at too fast of a speed, it will just go right through the end card, and so all you've got are just these two random pictures of scrolls on a map. Who knows? Anyway, that is everything I could remember as we were going through the video on Robespierre, and so ends the the second part of the French Revolution. Oh my God! Wait, chat. What? Hold on. There's got to be a way to filter for this. I feel like I have just skipped through a major donation from somebody, and I sincerely apologize. The chat revenue jumped from like $5 to $65, and I don't know how to find it. Spencer Koenig, thank you so much. Have some drug money, funny history, man. Al Ram asks, was Robespierre a philosopher? I mean, he definitely had a philosophy of some kind. Oh, okay, sweet. The stuff is actually showing up. No, oh my God, no, that wasn't. I thought, aha, this accounts for it. The donations are actually just showing up later in chat. No, it's just another big donation from somebody. Thank you so much. Tag along. There needs to be a way that I can filter through Super Chat, because I'm going to feel so bad if it says I have a way to filter, but I don't. The arrow isn't going anywhere. Someone asks, is this pre-recorded? No. That would be... I can kind of see where you get that from, considering I haven't been doing a whole lot with chat the whole time. I've just kind of been, like, riffing off of whatever I can remember. Dude, yeah, the end of... I was so surprised how well received the scream at the end of the video actually was taken, because I was like... I was not 100% sure, like trying to find a good thing of someone. Oh my God! Trying to find a good thing of somebody screaming, a good sound effect, is challenging, and finding one that doesn't just end up coming across as being comedic instead. As I say this, there's just a massive donation from. Oh God, chat is scrolling in ways that I can't control. Why can't I? Tactical noob tube. I'm like, something tube, noob, something in there. Sent no money. From $99. Oh my God. Thank you so much. Saying, do more. Rome 2. I agree. Do more. Cody Ricketts. This meme continues. Do more history, man. Oh, Jesus. Well, I mean, I was going to save Napoleon for like next week or something, but this is a pretty powerful request for an encore, if I do say so myself. Alexis Erudite asks, where did you get the Robespierre scream from? I think I just searched like man screaming sound effects and went for the first one that wasn't just somebody with like a terrible 2002 microphone going, ah. There are some awful sound effects on YouTube. I'm seeing some yeses. I think that's in response to like the energy continuing. Now I will warn you, right? If as we start on Napoleon, we're gonna start on Napoleon. Robespierre, I took a good like half hour just to refresh myself on everything that was in my notes ahead of time, so that I could like see a part of the video and go, aha, this is the thing that's kind of like that, and it reminds me of the bit in the notes where I'm gonna say the stuff. Napoleon, we're going into this blind. So I'm gonna open up the Napoleon video. I'm gonna open up the notes. I'm gonna hope that I just remember stuff because this was published a little while ago.
1794. The future of France.
The music continues to get more dramatic. Yeah, the Robespierre music going from classical to romantic. Nice. Oh, that's right. The 1812 overture in this one. That was Napoleon. Napoleon was such a big deal that people were writing music about him. So Beethoven's Third Symphony, dubbed Eroica, or like Latin or something for heroic, was originally composed about Napoleon. And then Napoleon kind of started conquering everybody and just started getting really aggressive. And so Beethoven had to be like, scratch that. This has nothing to do with Napoleon. I am not condoning Napoleon. He used to be my hero, but I am no longer endorsing this. I think Beethoven was just like personally very disappointed by the way Napoleon turned France into an empire and started attacking everybody. But it is fun to imagine Beethoven just like trying to avoid being canceled by writing a love letter to Napoleon. And then Tchaikovsky's 1812 overture is not so like in favor of Napoleon because it's actually about the Russian retaliation to Napoleon and that winter march in which he got so soundly defeated. Average height time, boys. Oh yeah. I think he was like, obviously there's the myth of him being super short. I think he was like an inch or two smaller than average, and that was like smaller than the 19th century average. So like he's, if he were alive today, he'd be sort of short, but like he's Zephyrus. He's not short. He's just far away. That's right. Never forget that Napoleon, he just stands very far away from cameras with the intention of making himself appear smaller. I don't know why there's I'm just looking at, I'm still trying to find that like mystery donation from earlier, and there's a little button that says top chat with an arrow, the same way that like, on the comment section you can filter by like top or new or whatever. And I feel like there's gotta be a way that it will show me this, but it's just, I click on it and nothing happens. Nothing. It just means I need to like swap over to the streaming thing earlier, or else just don't donate unless I'm reading from chat. Which is probably not a thing I should be saying. What I should be saying is, yes, please, donations, always welcome. Check out my Patreon, where you can find past live streams and other behind-the-scenes videos, which are not quite as long or in-depth, because I think I kind of like this format better, but... that's right. I was trying to pull up my Napoleon notes. Napoleon was weird. Napoleon was one that, like, was also ended up with like a lot of stuff being written about him, even though it was nowhere near as dense as researching for Robespierre. That was it felt really good at the end of it when I'm like, yes, this is so masterfully crafted, but in the middle, yikes. Napoleon was a lot simpler, and yet there's just a lot of stuff because people write a lot about Napoleon. People are endlessly fascinated with Napoleon in ways that I still don't entirely understand. He's kind of like Augustus in that way, that I'm kind of like, I think this dude is slightly overrated if I do say so myself. But obviously, you do see a guy take over half of Europe and you go, oh, yeah, that's something you don't see every day. This is something that apparently I thought was very important, and so I put it right at the top of my notes. before anything else in the video, which was saying, "This is neither here nor there, but the Napoleonic Code abolishing divorce by mutual consent is the perfect setup for the myth of consensual divorce. Isn't there someone you forgot to ask?" Panning over to a grumpy Napoleon. Oh God, I want that meme now. Why? That could be like perfect Twitter content for as I never post on Twitter these days. All right. Notes are open. Notes are being opened on my phone so I can actually see them while I'm playing the video instead of having to pause the video and then see whether or not I have something interesting to say. And then, at last, we shall have our encore. 1794. The future of France is here, and it's... this... I don't totally know what happened with this scene. A little animation thing. So, France is here. This scene, ultimately, it was like the night before this video had to go up, and I got this scene back from the animator, and it was like, it wasn't quite long enough for the full sound clip for the song, because I hadn't put in the song. I just like had a little gap of silence. I was like, oh, by default, right, these animations are usually at like 30 frames per second. So animation, like, it's not uncommon to have animation run at like 12 or 15 frames a second or even lower, because that's just how animation works sometimes, because, you know, the days of hand-drawn animation, you did not want to draw the same thing 30 times in a single second. 15 was plenty, but I kind of, like, slowed this down to half speed, and it's just got a little jittery. But anyway, I like the setup overall. It just ended up getting a little choppy. Oh, and the music cue. The music cue is from a French Revolution musical called The Scarlet Pimpernel? Something like that. And I haven't listened to the full thing. I can't really comment on it, but this song slaps. There's just this whole song of, like, you know, this fervor of the crowd bringing people to the guillotine. We love a little bit of, like, high drama musicality getting brought to history. It's rough. It's real rough. Citizens of Paris were executed for the crime of being... I'm just like humming along to that background music because I've heard it so many times. Good old Gustav Holst Planet series. Not one I listen to regularly, but just through editing this video. Kind of like when I had the stupid... What was it called? Camille Saint-Saëns, the Danse Macabre. In the Ibrahim II video. Half of that video has the Danse Macabre in the background, and for like 2 to 3 weeks, just in my head all the time was that song. Nervous about all the executions, and I didn't even get to mention the casualties of the ongoing civil wars in the provinces, or the thousands of people killed by mass drowning.
Shh! Do you hear that? That's the sound of forgiveness.
That's the sound of people drowning.
Jean-Baptiste Carrier.
That is what forgiveness sounds like. Screaming and then silence.
Good old llamas with hats. The opportunity there was too perfect not to make that reference. That was... The War in the Vendée is another thing where it's like, hey, you want to go through the entirety of the French Revolution from another point of view? Check out someone who was in the War in the Vendée. It was just this, like, provincial civil war, because obviously the rest of France was not as revolutionary as Paris. So you ended up with stuff like this, with lots of drowning. I think there were, like, a handful, like, the same place, in the same way that the guillotine was, like, the national razor of France. The river or the sea or whatever outside of this one city was called the National Bath, because so many people were just consistently, like 4 or 5 times, just getting drowned in there.
Things continued to get worse until eventually a certain national barber threatened to execute the entire government, and the government finally decided it was time to do something about him. So hip hip hurrah, but now what? This video is sponsored by Magellan TV, Hey, more ads.
Oh, I'll just kind of like, I feel bad being like, let's watch through the whole ad. I don't want to do that to you, but like, I actually really had a good time with this Napoleon documentary because it showed a lot of like parts of his life that I just couldn't really, because like they made a whole 45-minute documentary. I'll just play it on mute or whatever so you get the thing. They made a whole 45-minute documentary on like this one battle at the Siege of Toulon, in which Napoleon is like this random soldier who is like trying to get himself promoted and like having to fight against all these people who are like, it's the reign of terror and no one wants to like step out of line because they might get reported to Paris. And you've got Napoleon who is like, well, I'm kind of screwed if I don't, so let's just make big plays and hope for the best. There's a bunch of stuff about by the way, that code is still good. There's a bunch of stuff about Napoleon's early life that I couldn't really get to that is very interesting. I'm going to get to it at some point. I'm trying to think of like where it'll fit best to talk about in this whole video. But there's also all the stuff that happened in Corsica before he even went to mainland France. And there was like a whole three-way conflict there because you have the royalists and the revolutionaries and also the Corsican like nationalists who wanted to just be independent.
They had to dump all the blame onto Robespierre. Can't have anyone thinking there was more than one person responsible for the actions taken by a republic, after all.
Oh, there you go. See, whoever was talking about his reputation being soiled was there you go. We mention it. The fun thing about this series was if people had a popular complaint about one episode, I could just kind of like subtly address it in the next episode. Like people were talking about the the vote to kill him passing by a single vote. And it's like, oh, let me add some more nuance to that in the Robespierre video. Oh, people are saying that Robespierre was unfairly attacked. Let me just address that a little subtly in the Oh, I'm watching the live stream and it's further behind than I thought. I saw the video start to play and I thought that like somehow it had gone without my knowing. Oh yeah, anyway, people had like mentioned that about Robespierre and I just kind of like subtly worked that in there to the next video. Clay says, Napoleon fan here. It's because of this dude who was born in a random province, nowhere to declare himself emperor, and slapped the entirety of Europe for multiple years. I mean, yeah, it is impressive. Someone asked, I saw about if I would remaster old videos. I would. I've been tempted a lot. Like, there's videos even when I Zephyrus, you're coming to my aid. Okay, I need to save this comment because like I said that in a second. Unless I immediately forget what I was talking about again. Jeez. Oh God, the chat is something is going on with my chat here where it is just not letting me stay where I want to, and it's just like bringing it back down. Okay, it is Scarlet Pimpernel. Zephyrus says, if you edit in Premiere, I do, I find using the optical flow option fixes jittery, slowed down clips. I am so gonna look into that. Oh, okay, that's the thing I was talking about, remastering videos. There's, Oracle sends a donation saying love your content. Thank you. Remastering videos. There are videos that I have been making, and in the time that I am making them, I have been like, wow, I want to remaster this video. I want to I wish I could sit down with this video for 4 to 6 weeks instead of the usual 2 and really, like, you know, make it as good as I possibly can. Unfortunately, like, that method is not super feasible, because, you know, I'm kind of dependent still on money from sponsorships, which only comes once per video. So it is ultimately, you know, beneficial enough for me to, like, have multiple videos a month. But there are a couple videos that are old enough now, right? Like the Pompey video, where it's like, okay, I only talked about him for like 5 minutes, and there's a bunch of stuff I intentionally left out of there. So, like, that's something I could potentially come back to and maybe make a more proper video on later. Oh my god, why is this? There's, hang on. Okay, I'm trying to like I'm trying to do some moderation right now, and my browser is being very, very laggy, and every time I try to, like, open up a menu, it decides to immediately close it again. I think it's taken care of. You do make a good point, Zephyrus, about, like, anything that you remaster does come at the cost of things that you new things that you could have made in that time, which is why I think, you know, the only way that I would remaster something is if I, you know, came back at it with, like, a substantially more resources or time or materials or something like that, where I could really make a meaningful difference. You know, as much as I would love to, like, hey, I'm gonna spend the next year making a feature-length historical drama about Basil II, like, that, is a little challenging, but something like Pompey would be possible. You know, one of those really early videos that just doesn't have a lot of information in it, nor does it have a lot of production quality. But probably won't happen.
Just imagine if the people discovered that the government was still run by the same people who voted to execute the proudest voices of the revolution. No. Instead, the government is going to rebrand once again and put 5 directors in charge so that no one person can go off the deep end and take all of France with him. But without a clear leader at the helm, the new government had no idea what direction to go. But maybe centrism is okay for now. Everybody just wanted a break from Jacobins and monarchists killing each other, as long as they got food on their plate.
I will say, one thing that ended up being a big resource for this was I was going through and I was watching I was on Canopy, which is this website that has a bunch of classic films. I was trying to find the, like, classic silent film Napoleon that was like made in 1927. Excuse me while I try to switch on a light. It was from 1927, and it is, you know, just one of those, like, classic movies that gets referenced in places, which I should mention is also where this shot all the way back here that I already had 2 things to say about, this shot was meant to be imitating, there's a famous shot from the 1927 Napoleon film in which it's the Reign of Terror, and everyone on the assembly floor is, like, attacking each other and getting riled up, and what he does is, like, he just attaches the camera to, like, a rope, and just swings it back and forth, because he's like, ooh, yeah, it's like, I'm gonna compare this with Napoleon on a small ship at sea, and you have the waves of the people rocking the Republic, just like you have the waves at sea rocking Napoleon, which was very kind of out there stuff for 1927. You can hear my film student background rearing its ugly head. I was looking for that. I was trying to find a copy of that on Canopy, and I ended up finding the
Great Courses Plus, like, whole 30-part series on the French Revolution, which for this video ended up being kind of a godsend because it just made it a lot easier to digest, you know, the differences between the different governments and like, okay, what's the big deal with the Directory? What were they doing? How did they stay in power for a whole 5 years before being ousted? I wish I could say I've been sponsored by them recently and give you a link to go check them out. I think the Teddy Roosevelt video has a link to them. If that link still works, you can go find the Teddy Roosevelt video and get a free thing to the Great Courses Plus. Oh, except the Directory removed the price cap on food, so prices skyrocketed, which is the exact thing that got this whole mess started in the first place. I do love the little, like, having him in the little podium man in different poses from time to time. Cute. In the first place. The government tries shutting down the political clubs so people will stop getting so political about starving to death, but all they manage to do is piss off everybody on both sides. Guess what, folks? It's the start of the revolution all over again. Tired of your old 1789 to 9... This is a pretty late addition to this. Like, I normally have a shot list of everything that I want to do on the chalkboard versus everything that I want to do in kind of its own little thing. And I think just as I was recording this, I just kind of impromptu took on this very like old car commercial voice. And as I was editing, I was like, this needs a little something. 94 Revolution, why not trade up for the newest model? It's got everything you've come to expect. Riots in the streets, massacres in the prison, civil war, and for a limited time, ask about this dude named after a Roman plotting an underground proto-communist conspiracy. So I should probably address what some of these things are. I no longer recognize... This, I think, was one of the uprisings that got featured in the Robespierre video. I want to say it's like the 10th of August attack on the palace with the king inside. Why not trade up for the newest model? It's got everything you've come to expect. Riots in the streets, massacres in the prisons. Let me... Oh, you know what? I'll have to pull up the French Revolution page because it's not going to be on the Napoleon page because I took that from Great Courses and not stuff about Napoleon in particular. Trying to find what the massacre in the prison was, because riots in the streets is pretty generic. They don't have a whole lot on the directory. We'll see. We'll see. See if the word massacre pulls up anything. Hey! The Goncourt brothers. I don't remember them. Several former monasteries were turned into ballrooms. Turned into a prison where 191 members of the Catholic Church were massacred on... Oh, no, that's the September massacres. What? Where'd the, French directory, you disappoint me. Anyway, there was all of that stuff. I think I've lost the specifics. Civil War, and for a... I think the Civil War, though, that's just continuing... That's referring to the ongoing war in the Vendée. Like, I think that picture... was pulled from here somewhere? No, that's Napoleon's Italian campaigns. I really thought that, this is why I normally go through these, like, once before doing, commentaries. Or, if I just search Vendée. I'm sure this is the really fascinating stuff that you're here for, is, you know, not the impassioned speeches about exciting moments and standoffs between world leaders. It's, where is that one picture from about, I control F and I found the thing on Vendée itself and not the war in the Vendée. No, don't make me search. I need like a timer that says if I don't find things in a certain amount of time, I need to just like move on. Capture of François de Charette. Now that I remember picking this picture for a reason and being like, yeah, that's symbolic of something. I think it was just the time. I think it was that it fell during the time frame of the Directory, because the War in the Vendée lasted a very long time, and a lot of the stuff that was like very famous about it was all like 1792, 93. I'm gonna say that's what it was.
For a limited time, ask about this dude named after a Roman plotting an underground proto-communist conspiracy.
So, that dude named after a Roman organizing an underground proto-communist conspiracy, his name is Gracchus Babeuf, who... I was talking, like, earlier in this stream about what is it with, like, you know, a lot of, like, Enlightenment era, Renaissance through Enlightenment era politicians and their, like, obsession with ancient Rome. This guy literally changed his name to that of a Roman statesman because he just really resonated with that kind of, like, with his mission. Which is pretty epic, if you ask me. He had he had his own, like, counter-government secret directory, and it led to... No, he wasn't directly involved in Vendémiaire. 13 Von... Are you kidding me? We're gonna... That's all I wrote about him. He, like... I think Marx had something to say about him. He was another one of those things where, like, you know, as Marx was coming up with communism, he was like, oh, shout out to these other people who have done a little proto-communism in their time, even though they didn't have a word for it. No, okay, yeah, he wasn't involved in this one. Basically, just there was a lot of, you know, discontent with the government that manifested itself in various ways. Oh, yeah, he had a newspaper calling for a revolt against the government, so that definitely put him in a little bit of hot water. Been called the first revolutionary communist. Okay, if there was a quote from Marx about him, it's not on his Wikipedia page. I can't terribly be bothered to go further than that. Pour one out for Gracchus.
It was a day like any other when a bunch of pissed-off royalists from the provinces came flooding into Paris, led by this pirate-looking dude who is famous for making owl noises.
Oh, God, what's his name? Ah, wait, okay, he is going to be in here. What is his name? What is his... Don't you... Jean Chouan, that's it, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Tell me he doesn't look like a pirate. Like, tell me he doesn't look like straight out of the 18th, 17th century. I think it's the, like, the hat, the bandana, the, like, the loose vest, and the... Interestingly, he's got a tie on. Sweet mustache. Yeah, it was actually, like, his secret code, the recognition symbol was actually just like, oh, I'm gonna impersonate a bird, which I'm sure must have been it definitely couldn't have been gone two ways, because there's no way you get, like, a responder who just knows the exact right call to reply with.
The director Paul Barras hunkers down with the rest of the directory in the old royal palace, biting his nails because if the last 18 uprisings are anything to go by, he's currently sitting in the least secure place in the city.
Yeah, they keep putting the government in that same palace, and it just kept getting attacked. They didn't really move it anywhere else.
The revolution, or what's left of it, could die here and now. He has no choice but to leave the future of France in the hands of a young commander who happened to be in town.
Yer! Vive le roi! Vive le roi! His eyes even go dark to imitate the owl. Kaboom! This was another challenging scene to get right. The zooms and all that are already a bit of a make it tricky to find images that are large enough to zoom all the way in. But with this one, what I wanted to do was a dolly instead of a zoom. And if you're working in traditional film, a dolly move is not especially complicated. Like, you can argue you need the budget to actually work with a dolly, but you put a camera on a wheelie chair and you move it forward, and that's your basic dolly shot. And animation, particularly cutout animation, that is a lot harder. I've had this great little animated illustration about what the difference is, and of course, if I search the difference between a dolly and a zoom, it's going to show me a dolly zoom, which is a completely different thing, which is when you do both at the same time. Difference, maybe? That one might be it. It's not the one I was looking for. But you'll notice that, like, when you actually move the camera forwards and backwards, things do get bigger and smaller, but at different rates. So we had to cut up this background image, and we basically needed to make it so that these edges of the buildings grew fastest, while these buildings needed to stay basically the same size.
Kaboom.
Unfortunately, we didn't quite get it to work the way I had imagined, so we ended up just settling on this, like, quick zoom in, zoom out, which is unfortunate. Like, the Robespierre and Napoleon both, we had to have, like, a few little compromises like that, just because the videos were each, like, close to 15 minutes, and they were back-to-back, and so that's, like, considering the regular videos are around 10 minutes, we were trying to make, like, 3 videos in the amount of time we normally spend on 2. So that's one of those things where it's like, I wish I could go back and, like, remaster this and get a really cool dolly shot and animation and, like, flex my directorial skills. But, yeah, sometimes you just gotta work with what you've got and work with the amount of time that you have. So if you're ever asking for why stuff takes so long, there you go. It's because I get it in my head. I'm like, but this would be so cool. It was. And then I spend forever trying to make it happen, and it doesn't always.
A massacre. Overnight, this low-ranking officer who'd been spending his time writing crappy self-insert romance novels became a national hero.
All right, this is where I need to open up the Napoleon page so I can find the name of this novel. I think it was actually like a novella. It was like kind of short. Yes. So Napoleon, was this before? Okay, this was before the Siege of Toulon. I'm going to very quickly try to, like, run you through everything that Napoleon did before the 13th of Vendemiaire, that revolution, or that uprising that he stopped, the revolution in an attempt to stop the revolution. So Napoleon was born in Corsica. Corsica had its own problems going on because it was also, like, it was originally independent, or, like, it belonged to Genoa, I think, and then it became French, and then there were people who wanted to become independent, but also there's the French Revolution happening on top of that. And Napoleon, meanwhile, has been studying in Paris, and he ends up joining the military, but eventually he kind of ends up going along with the side of the revolution rather than just, like, sticking to his guns as a Corsican and being like, I'm gonna show you, France. At some point, though, I don't think he actually wins in Corsica. Yeah, when Corsica declared formal secession from France and requested the protection of the British government, Napoleon and his commitment to the revolution came into conflict with Paoli, who is, like, the governor of Corsica, who was trying to make it independent. By preventing French assault, Bonaparte and his family were compelled to flee to Toulon and on the French mainland because of the split with Paoli. So he doesn't actually win in Corsica. I know, shocking that Napoleon would begin his career with any kind of defeat. How dare he? He ends up having to go to the mainland, and at first, for a little bit, he starts his writing career, which was the No, wait, this was after. Wait, did he write a novel before? Oh my god, okay. So apparently he wanted to be a writer, then he actually became a soldier, and then Siege of Toulon was this whole thing where the commanding officers are all incompetent, and Napoleon is like super smart and super cool and super awesome. And Napoleon is like, guys, I have a better idea. There is this, like, we're trying to break the siege on this town. The British have taken control over the city of Toulon. We need to go in there and take the city back. The commanding officers are all like, great, let's do what we always do. Let's just get a bunch of ladders, throw a bunch of men at the walls, and see if we can take it. And Napoleon is like, but there's this hill that the British are completely ignoring that's outside of the town that would allow us to, like, shoot cannons at the British ships where they can't really fire back, so we can scare off all the British, destroy their whole fleet, and take the town for free. And all of his commanding officers are like, but you're not a commanding officer. You are a grunt, so we're not going to listen to you. Eventually, he, like, plays some games where he does some small attack on his own, and it kind of works out, and so they give him a few men, but they don't give him enough men, so it looks like a failure, so everyone says it was a bad idea, but it was actually a good idea. They just didn't give him enough men to do it. And then at some point, he, like... They replace the original commanding officer, and this new guy from Paris shows up, and he's really butting heads with Napoleon, and he really doesn't like him. And Napoleon goes up to this dude, and he goes over, like, several layers of chain of command, and, like, writes directly to the Committee of Public Safety. And he puts the guy in a situation where he's like, look, either you can vouch for this new commanding officer who is going to fail because he is terrible at his job, and then the Committee of Public Safety is going to want your head, literally. Or, because you know my idea is the better idea, you can stick with me, get rid of the other guy, I go lead this attack, it works because I'm Napoleon and I'm always right, and we'll take the city. And eventually, that is what they did. But then he, like, kind of retired. He got engaged. There's all kinds of drama with, like, the first woman he was in a relationship with, and then he ends up with, like, some other woman that he's married to for a long time, but he has to divorce her because he's the emperor, and he has to, like, do government things, so he has to marry, like, a noble woman from Austria instead. But during this time, he wrote this, like, romantic novel that was just, it was literally just self-insert, like, wish fulfillment. He just wrote this novel about, like, a soldier and his lover, and the name of the woman in his novel, Eugenie, was actually, like, the middle name of his fiancée, who he never ended up marrying. It was always funny to be like, yeah, okay, you know, you always hear about Napoleon was doing so much by such a young age and what a talent he was. He was a very gifted tactician. He was not necessarily a gifted author. I think there's somewhere, I want to say, I'm hoping it's in here. It's probably just somewhere else when I was looking it up. There is some, like, quote about a review of his book and how it was actually pretty disappointing. I'm reading chat. Got ran out of Corsica by Paoli, right? This is the part where we figure out Jack Rackham curses a lot. Have I been? Oh dear, I hope I haven't been. I'm trying to keep this somewhat family friendly. I censor them in the videos. Heaven knows. Ryokich says, Napoleon, great tactician, terrible writer. Jamison Orton says, to be fair, I think if it wasn't for the revolution, he wouldn't have gotten as far as he did. Yeah, the unstable times certainly allow for there's definitely, like, a really wise quote I could have pulled out there. Like, yes, uncertain times allow for unusual rises in power. You can work it into something. It'll show up in a video at some point down the line.
Mr. Bonaparte, you have saved the people of France. Here, you are from Italy, right?
Well, Corsica, but...
Your accent says enough. Here is an army. We need you to invade Italy.
Napoleon's voice was a lot of fun. I had such a good time doing this. This is my headcanon of Napoleon now, because it actually, like, if you do some research into him, he was from an Italian family, and he was originally like Napoleone di Bonaparte or something like that. And he never totally lost his accent. And he learned to speak French, but he could never quite figure out French spelling, which it's French. Like, that has got to be the worst language to spell anyway. I can't really say I blame him. He's got better things to do with his time. But yeah, I always find it weird when people portray him as, like, being like the super Frenchiest Frenchman who ever Frenched, when he's actually super Italian. And he also, someone made a comment about him being very, like, Godfathery or something like that. The other voice that I was playing around for with him was, like, I kind of wanted him to sound like the Godfather, just for being this, like, big important person who commands a lot of respect. But it just kind of took way too much energy out of the video, because he speaks so softly, and also it was just kind of a hard voice for me to do. But he was played by Marlon Brando at one point, so there is that. Like, the connection is real. He is 100% Godfathery.
Bon chance.
Well, luckily, it turns out Napoleon Bonaparte was an alright general. His basic strategy was to win the war not with his men's bayonets, but with their feet. He moved incredibly quickly, scavenging for food along the way, allowing him to get in behind the enemy and force a huge battle when they least expect it, thereby knocking one of his opponents out of the war before their allies ever got the chance to help out. But the real secret sauce was his PR. Napoleon wouldn't have made it this far if he simply won battles. He made sure everyone knew he was an inscrutable genius who balked at authority and led his men to glory no matter the odds. And in Italy, he would bring triumph to the motherland and forge a new era in Europe.
This was another very fun scene to make. Another one that ended up, involving really big images that slowed down the computer, yada, yada, yada. But this is also a reference to that classic silent film, the silent epic of Napoleon from 1927, in which the ending of that film is actually, I believe it's actually this moment. It is Napoleon, like, leading his army into the Alps to defeat the Italians in, like, the War of the Second Coalition, one of those early ones, where getting some notifications that I don't know if they're showing up in the live stream or not. Anyway, it doesn't matter too much. He has this, like, big epic battle, and the way that the film concludes is, like, you've been watching this film the whole time on a screen, like a normal person going to a normal movie. And then all of a sudden, the director goes, "Oh, you thought that was all? No. Napoleon's epicness cannot be contained to a single screen." And he just, like, pulls back the curtains, and there's 2 more screens, and there's this, like, triptych panoramic view of the entire battle that is just such a move from that director.
In Europe. In reality, I mean, he was tactically brilliant and incredibly charismatic, but he basically improv'd his way through the war and just took any opportunity that looked good to him. Napoleon chased the Austrians out of Italy and went,
I'm here. I've got all the guns. Hey, who wants to make a new country?
There is some context behind this, if I can remember enough of it. Basically, France, when it was fighting Austria, went into the Netherlands and set up the Netherlands to be a republic. And it was like one of the sister republics. They're like, yes, the revolution is spreading. We are going to change the way that Europe does politics forever. And so Napoleon, when he was in Italy, he actually just did the same thing, like, on his own and made a new republic. He just casually created a government that, like, France didn't really want him to. Like, they weren't really looking for that in Italy, but he just did it anyway. And then somehow or other, that ends up tying into, like, the first kind of ideas of Italy for a long time had been ruled by, like, you know, the Holy Roman Empire, and the Austrians ruled northern Italy for a long time. And then you've got, like, the Pope has his thing in Middle Italy, and then there's, like, random city-states in between, and Sicily is its own thing, and Sardinia, and sometimes, like, Sicily's occupied by North Africans. But around this time, you get kind of this first inkling of, like, Italian identity, and this is sort of where the first, not the first time anyone ever thought of it this way, but where it was the beginning of the conversations that eventually led to the unification of Italy later on in the 19th century. Oh yeah, and they also did that with the Rhineland, the sister republic thing.
Kind of did the same thing in Egypt. Nelson shredded his entire fleet.
Ooh, okay, wait, there was also, there was one other thing that I wanted to mention. Uncertain times create unusual characters. There you go. Otto Friedrich Ludwig von Wittelsbach says, damn, man, you should be a voice actor. I would love to. I gotta find stuff to voice act in is the trouble. Although, voice acting is, there is a lot of, like, there's, you know, like any acting, there's a lot of competition, but also with voice acting, the same person can do multiple roles, and can be, like, it's very easy, because voice actors are usually, like, working on a project for not very long, so the same people will voice act in a lot of stuff, making it very hard to, like, get into. Oh, the Irish Revolution, that's what I was going to talk about. The Irish Revolution of 1798 is also a very cool piece of history that coincided with the French Revolution and Napoleon, in which Ireland was rebelling against Britain, and there's a very interesting story there involving a guy called Wolfe Tone, who I originally included as, like, if you go back to, like, one of my older videos before a certain point when I redid the intro to include pictures of people I'd actually made videos about. Wolfe Tone is one of them, who was the leader of the 1798 Irish Rebellion, and France was actually kind of trying to set up to invade Ireland to, like, help them create this republic there. And it was going to be another one of these, like, sister republics, but it just, like, it didn't quite work because invading the British Isles never seems to work. But they were working on it. It's another fun, like, you know, what if in history. You know, what if Ireland had actually gotten its independence by the year 1798 or 1800? Something potato famine playing out a lot differently.
Fleet. So Napoleon goes,
Well, I guess I'm stuck being the king of Egypt for a while.
and then he straight up ditches the war in Egypt and goes home without telling anyone. Then shows.
Oh my god, I really just skipped over the war in Egypt here. So, I'm reading from my notes here, making sure that I'm in the right spot and that this will all, like, make sense. Oh, no, that's more information about the war in Italy. Okay, Italian campaign, kind of the same stuff. You know, he's good at marching. He, like, really empathizes and connects with his soldiers. Everybody likes him. He's hot stuff. He then also, like, Napoleon was big both in Egypt and in Italy. He was really big on, like, taking cultural artifacts as a, like, sign of victory, and also because, you know, he's just a very, like, intelligent and worldly man, which is how, like, the Mona Lisa, which was painted by Leonardo da Vinci, is currently in the Louvre, which is in Paris, which is not where da Vinci was living. And that's also the story behind the Rosetta Stone, is, like, he found it in Egypt and he brought it back, and that's how we eventually learned to decipher hieroglyphs. So, hooray for war, I guess. And then, the thing that I love is that Napoleon, when he was going through Italy, he took the horses of Saint Mark, which, if you don't know the story about them, is these horses which were originally somewhere in Constantinople. I think they were like statues that were like in the racetrack there in the circus. And during the Fourth Crusade, Venice just stole, like, as long as they were, destroying the capital of Christianity in the Eastern Mediterranean, they also took these horses and sat them up in Venice. And they just sat there for hundreds of years. And then Napoleon, of course, goes and takes those same horses and takes them to France. And yet, for some reason, the horses ended up getting returned to Venice, I think, because I want to say they're still there. Or actually, they're not still in the plaza. They had to replace the originals with replicas. But I'm pretty sure the originals are in Venice. And, like, I don't know what it is about those horses in particular that really, like, I'm usually not, like, so impassioned about, things in museums ending up in some other place because they were, like, stolen. I think there's, like, convincing arguments to be made for sure, but it's not something that usually, like, really gets me riled up, except for whatever reason. I think it's just the sheer stupidity of the Fourth Crusade that really makes me be like, okay, though, like, can we please send these horses back to, it's not even Constantinople anymore, but you send them back to where they came from. I think it's just the Roman fanboy in me getting upset at things being taken from Rome. So the Egyptian... God, I forgot I also was breezing through the Egyptian campaign. So, Egypt... Did I mention exactly why he was in Egypt here?
Hey, who wants...
Napoleon goes,
3?
kind of did the same thing in Egypt. Nelson shredded his...
No, I didn't. Okay, so... Egypt is kind of a weird place for Napoleon to be fighting the British, considering that France and Britain are only separated by, like, 20 miles or something. But yeah, it's like, that's just how war is done these days. Like, the most effective way to fight Britain is to travel all the way across the Mediterranean to Egypt. Because the idea was that he was going to go there, he was going to disrupt trade, he was going to, take control of the Red Sea. Suez Canal didn't exist at the time, although I think Napoleon was, like, theorizing about it and, like, talking about it. It was gonna, like, try to separate India from England, and eventually, he hoped to actually invade India and have France take some of the British land over there. He also kind of wanted Egypt for its own sake. Egypt was it was seen as this valuable colony that wasn't going to be dependent on slave labor, because when Napoleon brought back slavery, which I'm sure was an awkward conversation for a lot of people, he did it in the sense that, like, he was like, okay, in the places where they actually got rid of slavery during the Revolution, we're not going to apply it to those places. We're just going to apply it to the places that didn't listen and were whatever colonies. But, like, he kind of knew that, like, slavery wasn't going to be the most effective economic model or whatever, because, he's such a good, kind-hearted man, that Napoleon. So Egypt was seen as this, like, great colony for them. That was, like, it wasn't going to be dependent on slave labor. It was an idea that had been floated around for a while in France. But he shows up, and while he goes like down the Nile, and he fights this big battle on land, and he's like victorious, huzzah, and then he goes back to the sea, and all of his ships are gone. And he's like, what happened here? And basically the ships were anchored just slightly offshore, where they thought that no one could get in between them and the shore, and, like, so that way they could just form a defensive line. And Nelson just, like, sailed right in between them, and they had moved all of their cannons to the offshore side, so they literally couldn't return fire, and Nelson just goes through and wipes out all of them. So then, Napoleon ends up just basically making himself like king of Egypt for a while. He does, again, in this very like Napoleon valuing pragmatism over ideals, he basically is like, people of Egypt, don't worry, I am a devout Muslim now. He didn't actually convert, but, you know, whereas in France, he's very much like, no, I am a secular man. In Egypt, he's like, yes, I truly value the wisdom of the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad. And everyone kind of sees right through him just because he's like trying to keep all of these people content. He ended up fighting some wars with the Ottomans because Egypt was still technically part of the Ottoman Empire. So even though he was like fighting with Britain over it, the rest of the Ottoman Empire was like, oh yeah, Egypt is under attack. It's being occupied. We should probably do something about that. And they try to, and he basically like he wins some victories and he does some war crimes, which I think I had a whole little bit here about like, but do you count them? You know, some people are going to argue that, like, ooh, the concept of war crimes didn't exist yet, so you can't criticize him for yada yada. I was like, he basically did some war crimes. He, you know, basically conquered a city and then was like, all right, my men, go assault every civilian you can find and take all their stuff. And that was the campaign in Egypt. And I had to reduce it down to about 2 sentences. I'm now reading comments. Rome 2 says that sums up the British Museum. Basically does. Zephyr says supposedly based on Greek originals, but they're like 3rd century CE. Yeah, they're very, very old, those horses. Benedict Arnold. Oh, that'd be an interesting idea for a video. Ken Yost suggests Benedict Arnold, but from his perspective. That would be pretty cool, actually. Like, one of the things that I've really enjoyed about doing this French Revolution series was being able to show the French Revolution from different perspectives. Like, you know, do the King Louis one where it's like, poor King Louis just wanted to be loved and everyone ended up hating him because he just wasn't good at his job. And then the cool thing about, you know, going into Robespierre was like, oh no, here's Louis as like a terrible, horrible person who is, you know, doing bad things. So doing something like Benedict Arnold or like some person who is kind of, you know, known for a really bad thing that they did and covering it from their perspective would be interesting. Like, I've done, like, you know, Nero, where it's like, oh, he actually wasn't that bad. But, like, somebody who, like, no, they did do the thing that they're accused of, but, like, here's their perspective. It's interesting. Comments on Nelson. Logan Figueredo. Nelson is such a Chad, one of the greatest admirals in history, but was also seasick all the time. Oh, I didn't know that. And Jamison Orton here with Nelson died a pretty metal death, just dying gloriously in the heat of battle. Oh, yeah. Cowabunga, dudes. Entire fleet, so Napoleon goes, well, I guess I'm stuck being the king of Egypt for a while. And then he straight up ditches the war in Egypt and goes home without telling anyone. Then shows up in France like, what's up? Check this out. Huge victory, the biggest. Don't read the newspapers. And, well, Egypt might not have been a success, but frankly, the rest of the War of the Second Coalition has been an even bigger failure in his absence. Everybody Napoleon liberated in Italy got recaptured by the Austrians, and the French government is collapsing. In fact, as soon as Napoleon arrives in Paris, So I think I mentioned it somewhere else here, but I don't really want to, like, wait through the whole video until it comes up, is Napoleon's thing with PR. I really wish I had found a little more information about how Napoleon pulled this off with his, like, public image and coming back and being like, yes, I am returned from an exotic land. Behold my treasures. Ooh. And how he, you know, managed to kind of like spin this all in his favor. And just in general, like, he really had a solid command over how people viewed him, even when, you know, things weren't necessarily favorable to him in reality. I think, like, his brothers were involved to some extent, but I couldn't find a lot about, like, how he actually did that, you know, unless he had some kind of in to the newspapers. One of the directors pulls him aside to say, hey, these guys are on their way out. I say we make a new government. I need the goodwill of the people, and I need the army. You've got both. What's in it for me? Directory goes bye-bye. Consulship goes hi-hi. I'll need someone to share power with.
I see. Just you and me splitting a power.
Well, there would be 3 people, but...
What? 3 people?
Yeah, first consul, second consul, third consul.
No third consul.
What do you mean no third consul?
That's not what a consulship is, that's a triumvirate.
Well, what's wrong with a triumvirate? Lots of people have made triumvirates over the years.
And did it ever work for those people?
Casual
No,
Macy's
it
Day.
never does.
Thanksgiving
One person
parade in the
always ends
background.
up becoming a dictator or an emperor, you know. They delude themselves into thinking it might be different, but it might work for us.
I'm in.
And so, one fateful morning, Napoleon's brother Lucien tells everyone there's a Jacobin uprising about to take place, and everyone needs to take shelter, and who better to defend the government than the man who saved the revolution? All he'll need is complete control of the armed forces in Paris. But as the hours stretch on and Napoleon's general arrests a couple of directors, Congress starts to realize it's not the Jacobins who are planning this coup. In an effort to regain a hold of the situation, Napoleon strides into the lower chamber with an indomitable spirit, and everyone inside goes, "Get him!" and they beat the crap out of him. Lucky for Napoleon, his brother gets him out safely, and while the men inside are passing a motion to make Napoleon an outlaw, Lucien lays him down at the feet of the guards and cries,
My boy! Look what they've done to my boy! Congress is being held hostage by conspiracists. They must be disbanded for the safety of France.
"Okay, you owe me a big time."
I get to this section and I keep thinking like, oh, I need to like explain a bunch of stuff. And it's like, no, it's all on the video. It's just that like this was originally, this whole scene was originally a footnote that I made for the Patreon patrons for Talleyrand when I did the Talleyrand video. And so in my head, all of this is like information that must be explained as footnotes, and like the fact that it's actually on screen continues to catch me off guard.
The coup goes according to plan, and boy howdy, who would have thought? One of the consuls ended up with significantly more power than the other two, and guess who that would be? At which point, Napoleon speedruns his way to monarchy.
Hey everybody, who thinks I should be consul for life? I'll know who you are if you say no.
The best part comes after Napoleon survives a couple assassination attempts and thinks to himself,
I may be the supreme leader for life, but if I died, people might try to put the Bourbons back in charge, right? Right you are, sir. Your safety is of the utmost importance. But you know what might stop that? What if, hear me out, what if my family were written into the Constitution as the supreme leaders for life? Sounds a lot like a king. No, as an emperor, totally different. I guess it sounds better than anarchy. Just don't overdo it. Behold, your new Augustus, the heir to Charlemagne, Emperor of France, King of Italy, and master of all Europe. From this moment hence, I am France.
Couple interesting things. Napoleon, first of all, Napoleon had a very interesting relationship with democracy in the ways that, like, he kind of only seemed to use it when it was, like, convenient for him. Like, if he had the goodwill of the people, great. And if he didn't, he was just like, we're just gonna rig this election anyway. It's fine. Luckily for him anyway, he always seemed to know which ones needed to be rigged and which ones didn't ahead of time. But that's basically, how he got a bunch of the, a new constitution passed and intimidating people into making him consul for life. And like some of these, it's weird because he actually was very popular. It wasn't like, modern day dictators where like no one votes for them, but they just say, oh, look, I got 98% of the vote. He actually had a lot of support, but he just kind of had that extra little bit of insurance on top of it. And then in regards to him being like the new Charlemagne and all that jazz, his coronation was a very noteworthy, there was a lot of historical
weight attached to it because he had the Pope there, which was big. I think there was some significance over, like, who was going to crown him. Like, was the Pope actually going to crown him or not? And I think the way he did it was he actually just crowned himself like a boss. But he also, like, he found, like, the Iron Cross of Lombardy, which is this, like, crown from, like, the 800s that either was used by Charlemagne or, like, some of his direct descendants. Anyway, he just dug up this, like, artifact of a crown that was at least 1,000 years old and just brought it back to give himself extra weight and significance and made it, he made it feel very, like, historically grand. And, like, any history buffs that are watching this, oh, you're gonna love it. And sure enough, it makes it a lot better, a lot juicier. What else was I gonna say? I think that covers it.
Time for more war. After that last assassination attempt, Napoleon had his men charge into Germany to kidnap some old French duke who wasn't even involved and plop him down in front of a firing squad.
Oh, right. The other thing about his coronation, I knew I was just going to pause the video in 5 seconds and say whatever it was that I had forgotten, was he crowned himself King of Italy at the same time. As he was like, yes, I am Emperor of France. Also, just calling dibs on Italy. Thanks. This was, let's see, kidnapping the guy. It was like the Duke of Enghien or something. In chat, burn 5,500 with all the different forms of government that France went through. But you forget that that so-called crappy republic had about, like, 5 different means of calling itself a government, 5 different, like, governing bodies in 2 years. Austrian commander writes back of telling his victory while subordinates finish off the French. France never break. Oh, I think this is just notes I've got on different battles. I hope that wasn't, like, a description of one of the big ones. A crew new blue. So missed the last half hour. Anything major happen? Napoleon became emperor, and I think I talked for a long time about Egypt. Instead of Amiens, Talleyrand's involvement trying to keep France and Europe stable. Oh man, I am losing focus big time. Can you tell it's getting late? Oh, this is interesting. This is around a similar time. Napoleon, in a similar way that Napoleon had a very interesting relationship towards democracy, he also had a very interesting relationship towards, like, equality and equal opportunity, in that he was a guy who, came to power from basically nothing. And so he obviously saw all of the detriments to having, entrenched power that is just unshakable. And so he had this little bit of, like, yeah, we want, like, meritocracy in here to a degree. But he was also, like, very authoritarian. Like, he, anytime there would be an assassination attempt or something, it would always turn into more and more power for the emperor. And so he kind of tried to, like, strike this balance where he's like, yes, I am a harsh and, ruthless ruler, but I am also fair. But he did at the same time, like, he brought back a bunch of the noblemen who had, like, fled during the revolution, all the people who were like, oh no, the Republicans are out to get us. So all the nobles started coming back, and he's like, yeah, listen, if you can contribute to my empire, I'll allow it. I'll allow religion. Just more of him being kind of practical above all else. which was very not cool, and the rest of Europe has a bone to pick with him. This is their chance for revenge. The Allies lost so badly, the Holy Roman Empire exploded. Just poof, 1,000 years of history, gone. Now to take care of Britain. Oh, wait.
The Holy Roman Empire exploding, the way that all ended, there is a very good video by History Matters that basically looks into the question of why did the Holy Roman Empire stop existing? And it was basically that nobody wanted it. Like, it was something to do with the fact that Austria and Prussia, like, you know, Germany was no longer really this, like, united region, because you had the Prussians on one side and the Austrians on the other who were competing for power. And Napoleon himself didn't really want to take the title of Holy Roman Empire, so everyone just kind of, like, let it slide, and it just ended up disappearing. And then, of course, you know, Napoleon ended up creating the Confederation of the Rhine as a buffer state / satellite state / puppet state.
Wait, no, fourth coalition. Prussia wasn't happy with Napoleon making satellite states in Germany, so it's time for revenge. Okay, Napoleon, maybe if we don't shake up continental politics every time.
A number of people, I forget actually what game this was called, that a number of people in the comments noticed and seemed to appreciate, which I can only chalk up to being the benefits of working with a team who can throw in references that I might not otherwise think of.
Time we win a war, they won't keep coming back for revenge. Napoleon crushes them before anyone else has time to intervene. Back to Britain. Your Majesty, our navy is in no position to win a naval battle anytime soon after the Trafalgar incident.
That's basically the way that Nelson died, was yeah, at the Battle of Trafalgar, which was I'm gonna be really embarrassed if I get this wrong, but it was a British victory, but it was, like, really, you know, kind of undercut by the fact that, like, their greatest admiral of all time was killed in battle, and it wasn't so much that, like, he you know, he didn't just, like, suicide bomb kamikaze his ship into the enemies. It was that there was, like, in addition to all of the cannon fire, there was also gunfire going between the ships, and a bullet just, like, knocked him out and did him in. I found something else about the coronation, which was that apparently not only did he have the Iron Crown of Lombardy, he also made a replica of the crown of Charlemagne, which is something different, and he got a golden laurel, like the one you see here, just for those extra, like, Roman emperor vibes. He, like, really wanted to have all of his bases covered, and, like, look at me, I am a important monarch who will be super important for thousands of years.
After the Trafalgar incident. Not to worry, I have a plan. We shall conquer the ocean on land. All we have to do is force everybody on the continent to stop trading with Britain, and they'll choke. Sir, I know. It's a big. It's a ballsy. It just might work. Except it didn't. Portugal immediately noped out of that one, but hey, Napoleon's crushed his enemies before. What's one more? Two more. Two more?
I should mention at some point, I don't think I got to talk about the Louisiana Purchase, which is a shame, because that is a thing that I've always found quite interesting. Another one of those questions that History Matters went into at some point was basically like, Napoleon has all of this land in the New World. Like, he has this really big empire, and so much of even the wars in the French Revolution was like, hey, let's get our empire back. Like, let's take land in India. Let's take back those, like, really important sugar-growing plantation islands in the Caribbean. So the fact that he sold Louisiana was this, like, you know, pretty dramatic-seeming decision on the surface of it. And I've immediately lost my place, so I don't have all the stuff I was going to say about it. It ended up coming down to basically, like, Louisiana was big, right? It wasn't necessarily the most profitable. Like, you had control of the Mississippi, which was big, but obviously that was going to cause conflict with the United States as they continued pushing on ever westward.
But it was mostly like, okay, we got a bunch of like raw materials here. We got, all the lumber we could ever need. Great, but we don't really have the like, high grossing crops like in the Caribbean and in some of our other plantations. So it was basically a way for Napoleon to say, I am going to sell this, and I'm going to transform that money into an immediate advantage for me now, which will allow me to win these wars, which will eventually give me domination over all Europe and become the new world order. So he was really kind of banking on really being able to make the most out of the payment that the United States gave him. And also just because, like, that way, you don't really have to worry about another theater that's an ocean away, because Britannia rules the sea, Like, anytime there is a naval battle during the Napoleonic Wars, the British almost always come out on top.
We're at war with Spain. L'Espagne is our ally. Was our ally, monsieur. As you're well aware, the situation in Spain was turbulent. The king was unpopular, and his son replaced him, no? Yes, but they both came to me for help. And so you chose the son who was very popular and would depend on you for power for the rest of his life? Napoleon? They wanted me to choose a king, and I chose my brother. And then they betrayed me.
Fifth coalition, Austria's back for revenge. Again, Napoleon smashes them and steals 20% of their population.
At least marry a princess so we can pretend to be on good terms. Fine. You shit a stocking.
Okay, a bunch of stuff here that I am going to try to keep in order so that I can just go like 1, 2, 3, name them all without forgetting. The war with Austria and taking 20% of the population, that was a huge thing, right? Because every time that Napoleon wins a war, he takes more and more from his enemies, which was like supposed to stop them from going to war with him again. But if anything, it just really encouraged them because, as soon as you take down Napoleon, everything is going to crumble. The other thing was Napoleon marrying a princess. This was a much bigger deal for Napoleon personally than I make it out to be. Because he had been married at this point for a very long time. And so, like, there's writings from his wife that are all, like, sad and bemoaning the fact that he has to have this, like, public office. Because, he kind of resisted for a long time after Talleyrand suggested it, but it was just ultimately sort of the right move politically. And what is Napoleon if not a pragmatist? So he ended up having to divorce his wife, although, he made sure she was, like, well taken care of, and I think they kept in touch, but they didn't, like, to my knowledge, they didn't continue to see each other that often, because Napoleon was a very busy man to begin with. And then the third thing is Napoleon calling Talleyrand, quote, a shit-stocking, which is an actual thing that he called him, because Talleyrand, at a certain point, sort of sold out Napoleon and just started writing letters to other world leaders and was like, hey, Napoleon seems to be on the back foot. I just want you to know he doesn't speak on behalf of France. We would appreciate it if you don't do to us the things that he did to you. That'd be great. I can maybe give you some military secrets or something like that. And Napoleon eventually, in his frustration with Talleyrand, calls him like a silk stocking filled with shit. I think he was just jealous in the way that Talleyrand managed to be more pragmatic than Napoleon.
And to be on good terms. Fine. You shit a stocking. I heard that.
Napoleon is now in charge of nearly everything from Spain to Poland, but there's uprisings everywhere. Russian Tsar Alexander I takes one look at the situation, and considering what happens to Napoleon's friends, he decides now is a good time to stop being Napoleon's friend. He starts trading with Britain again, and Napoleon can't take that lying down, so he decides that what he still hasn't managed to do in Portugal, he can easily do in Russia simultaneously. Oh, other thing about the whole marriage situation, there was also the issue that, like, Napoleon didn't have an heir. Like, there was, I think he, after remarrying, I want to say it was his son. There's a man known as Napoleon II who never actually ruled France. He was just like a soldier for a certain amount of time and then died young, and then Napoleon's nephew, Napoleon III, ended up taking over. Anyway, that was a whole issue of that. There's also, during the invasion of Russia, which I can't speak too much on the subject because I don't know a whole lot about it, but if you are interested in it, I would recommend looking into the Napoleonic Wars were a very important time in the history of Poland because Poland had previously been partitioned between Prussia, Austria, and Russia. And one of Napoleon's tactics for fighting the Russians was to establish what he called the Duchy of Warsaw, which was like very nearly made Poland a thing again until eventually Napoleon lost the war and Poland was repartitioned.
But the Russians are wise to Napoleon's tricks. They cull the countryside of anything forageable. Napoleon's men are dropping like flies, and even when they finally make it to Moscow,
Well, at least it's warmed up.
there's no choice but to retreat. And by the time he crosses the border, his grand army of 400,000 has been reduced to 10,000.
When I say his grand army, I am actually referring specifically to the central army. Like, there were multiple armies, so it was still a huge loss. There were other men still in the army that survived, but that particular army that Napoleon was in charge of still lost like 90% of its men.
And the rest of Europe? They like those odds. Within months, a new alliance was forged between Russia, Prussia, Austria, Spain, Portugal, Sweden, and of course Great Britain. Finally placed on the back foot, Napoleon's old strategies are failing him. There are no vanquished foes to feed the war machine, no foreign lands to pillage, no way to force apart the Allies. All he can muster are Pyrrhic victories, but France has given all she can give. Paris is captured and
Napoleon actually, as he was being pushed away from the continent, the Allies actually gave him terms of peace. Which I kept thinking that I mentioned in the video, but like I keep moving forward and being like, no, I don't see it, so maybe we'll come up on it in a minute and I will be made a fool. But they basically, I think the first terms they give him were like, hey, you're still gonna be emperor, you still get to keep the Rhineland, you still get to keep like Belgium, you still get to keep some other lands, but we're just gonna we're gonna go back to this point. And no further. And Napoleon, of course, because he never loses, rejects them. And then they keep winning. And then Napoleon's like, so, how about those terms? And they go, buddy. Oh, no. New terms, you stay emperor, but you go back to France's territory before the revolution. And Napoleon's like, no, that is unacceptable. I can't think of anything worse than that. And so, of course, when they ultimately win the war, they're like, hey, you know what would be worse than that? What if your territory was only the island of Elba? Have fun!
Napoleon is told he'll still be an emperor, but not in France. He's sent to the little island of Elba and kept under watch. In France, the Bourbon...
Hey, that 1812 overture coming in. I also think that now would be a good time to address some of the misconceptions about Napoleon marching into Russia during the winter. This was another one of those cases where, like, I'm pretty sure he didn't go marching in winter. It was more like, you know, he entered the country, and then Russia's a really big place, and it's really hard to conquer it. You know, even if you if you enter it in spring, you've only got, like, 9 months to do everything you need to do and win that war.
are back, baby. 20-some years and a million corpses later, it's another Louis back in action. The Allies are determined. There will be no empire, no emperor, not even a memory. If they can help it, the man who conquered half of Europe will have no legacy, not even as a martyr. But of course they could never succeed. The HRE was gone for good, Italian and Polish nationalism were on the rise, and all across Europe the seeds had been planted for the revolutions of 1848. Oh yeah, and Napoleon himself came back in less than a year. He steals across the sea in a boat with 1,000 men and marches towards Paris. He meets the king's men one misty morning and approaches them alone.
Citizen Bonaparte, on charges of insurrection. I'm just messing with you. Welcome back, big guy. And this kept happening, wave
I
after
can't pause
wave.
yet. That was, I don't know why, but that was just such a fun line to record because like you kind of have to smile in order to do the delivery. Also, pay no attention to the clipping going on here where the front part of Napoleon's robe just goes right over this guy. I think this was like, I didn't catch it because I think this Napoleon was probably, I'm not sure why this part of him would have been another layer. I was gonna say maybe it was from like a scene where he was riding a horse or something, and so that layer got brought in. But you know, it's just we're not gonna pay too much attention to that. Come back, big guy.
And this kept happening, wave after wave. Every time the army was supposed to arrest him, they switched sides and brought Napoleon right back to his throne in Paris without firing a single shot. The Allies scrambled to respond, and though France was in no better shape, things were set up just as Napoleon liked them, with the whole world against him. Before Europe could mobilize together, he would first cut off the British and stomp out his enemies one by one. But the British hold firm. Napoleon knows the taste of defeat, and for the first time, he hesitates. The Prussians arrive in time to rout the French, and Napoleon pleads.
This is obviously a somewhat simplified retelling of the Battle of Waterloo. You know, this like, ooh, Napoleon was now, you know, his confidence was shaken, and that's the reason he lost the war, you know.
Okay. We'll give the empire to my son, yeah? Or how about I go to the US? I could be a farmer in Louisiana. Please, I'll even take a New Jersey.
All things that were actually suggested. So as the Allies are closing in on Paris, it's weird because there's actually like this shift in public opinion against Napoleon, which is again my like strange hypothesis about like people writing about history sort of using the public as a character to reflect the way that you know, other people actually think about him. Because it's strange that like everyone in the public, or at least everyone in the army, loves him enough to bring him right back to Paris, and then so quickly the people of Paris are like, actually, I don't know about that guy anymore. We just threw out a king to replace him in order to bring him back, but now I'm a little angry because he lost the war. And then the stuff about like being a farmer in Louisiana or going to New Jersey, this was actually like a thing that Napoleon proposed, and I adore the idea of Napoleon living into old age in the United States, just like hanging out in New Jersey, being like just a dude, you know, just a farmer who like never returns to power, just lives out the rest of his days, has a little family farm, passes it down generations. You know, we could have today the Napoleon or the Bonaparte family farm, which would just be so delightful. What a fun little backstory that would be. Imagine like going to, you know, a very, very small town tourist attraction and having their little like family story be like, actually, yes, we used to rule half of Europe and now we grow corn.
Shoot. Guess it beats the guillotine.
Okay, and that is where we shall end for today. Thank you so much, everyone, for sticking with me this whole time and seeing names like Jemison Orton and Tactical Noob Tube who've just been hanging around for a whole like 2-3 hours, however long we've been doing this. Luke C, now we go crowing. This has been a lot of fun. I need to drink lots of water now and probably get some rest. I want to keep doing this. This is a great little way to do the behind the scenes stuff. And don't forget, if you want to get like the whole VOD recording stuff at the end of this, that's going to be available on Patreon. I'll have it uploaded, you know, probably at kind of a reasonable time. Thank you all so much. I will see you later. Cheers. I forgot my my client is lagging, so pushing the end stream button is going to take a minute before it actually ends stream.